Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 276 Stalemate. After defeating the Dothraki, Targaryen has clearly proved that he has the second strongest power among the trading cities. He has surpassed the distant Volantis and has the strength to challenge the big brother. Dragons are the source of Targaryen's power. Dragons can create many miracles, which are also unattainable by other forces. However, revenge is not delayed, but Viserys also needs to consider the cost of turning against Braavos now. His dragons may not be able to fully exert their effects on Braavos, and Braavos has strong military manufacturing capabilities, not a traditional nomadic tribe like the Dothraki. They really have many giant crossbows that can threaten dragons. If Balleron faces hundreds of giant crossbows pointing straight to the sky, even if the crotches of such things are not good and the shots are very crooked, they can't stand the blind cat meeting the dead mouse. If fighting the Dothraki is not a threat to the dragon, it is a human-machine difficulty that can be freely played, and facing the terrifying giant crossbow array of Braavos is probably a hellish difficulty that requires top-notch operation. And Braavos has made more than just these preparations to fight the dragon. Because the founders of Braavos were a group of slaves who escaped from Valyria, they were actually prepared to fight the dragon at the beginning of their establishment. The whole Braavos is a stone city, connected by hundreds of islands. But there is not even a tree in the whole city, or bare stone houses. They are connected by stone bridges, and perhaps only in the port are there dense wooden ships. Therefore, Braavos can stand up straight and calmly when facing the threat of the dragon, because the dragon's flame is difficult to ignite the city, and the threat is naturally greatly reduced. And now it is not just the continent of Essos that is in turmoil because of the rise of Targaryen. Westeros is also facing winter, with hundreds of thousands of wildlings approaching the city. The coalition of nobles from the 7 countries will not give in, preventing the wildlings from crossing the Great Wall and fleeing to the south. The two sides have held several negotiations, but to no avail. It seems that the problem will eventually be solved by war. Now is the best time for Viserys to send troops to retake Westeros, as he is accumulating strength and waiting for the Baratheon dynasty to fight the wildlings and the White Walkers to a draw. If he turns against Braavos now, he may miss this opportunity and give the Iron Throne a chance to breathe. The night outside the window is heavy, and crows make unpleasant cries on the top of the city. Viserys sat quietly in the room of the castle alone, with his fingers crossed, looking at the night outside the window for a long time without saying a word, thinking about the general direction of the future. There is actually nothing to consider about the next battle. Although the 80,000 Dothraki coalition forces only lost 30,000, and this is not the main battlefield. However, the loss of 30,000 people also liberated 20,000 Targaryen soldiers. One rises while the other falls. The strength comparison between the two sides is no longer in the previous unbalanced state, but has made a big turn, and has come to the point where the Targaryen army has a dominant advantage. The two armies of Pentos and Engelhard are in a pincer position, which can just trap the remaining 50,000 Dothraki in the center, like a big net slowly spreading out. After a night's rest tonight, you can lead the army to set off tomorrow. If the Dothraki are not well informed, you may be able to seize the opportunity to finish the job. None of these 50,000 Dothraki can escape. Then, I don't know how long it has passed. The thick fog slowly came in the morning of the next day. At the same time, in Pentos, which is not far away, John Clinton got up very early and was busy in his room, dealing with military and political affairs of Pentos. Although he had commanded a war and had sufficient experience in command and dispatch as the Prime Minister of the kingdom, John Clinton still felt that he was a little too busy recently. He is now equivalent to taking over the duties of the Prime Minister of the new dynasty. There are many major and minor affairs in Pentos recently, no matter how big or small, all of which are on his shoulders. He needs to consider both defending the city and internal affairs, and he needs to pay more attention to the situation of material reserves. Because now their king is not in the city, but riding a dragon out for a trip. Outside, the Dothraki army surrounded Pentus so tightly that not even a fly could fly in. However, Viserys acted as if nothing had happened, riding his dragon and flying around whenever he needed to. He could even fly over the Dothraki heads, as if he was patrolling the territory, which frightened the three Khals so much that they hid in the tents of ordinary people. They dared not sleep in their own tents, fearing that a pillar of fire would fall from the sky and burn them to a crisp. Even now, the three Khals in Pentus have already backed out, but they are too embarrassed to be the first to bring it up. Such a strong westward expedition, but without any benefits, they just ran back with their tails between their legs. I'm afraid that this will become the shame of the Khal in the future, and they will be looked down upon by other peers, and even their own people will gradually become disunited. Dothraki admire warriors and look down on cowards. A cowardly Khal is not qualified to ride the strongest warhorse. However, the three Khals thought too much that Viserys had not paid attention to them recently, but was looking for trouble elsewhere. One night some time ago, the pirates who blocked the Bay of Pentus suddenly suffered a heavy blow. The news did not reach Pentus until 2 days later. It was said that more than a dozen ships were burned by dragons. These pirates suffered heavy losses and were forced to give up blocking the Bay of Pentus. And everyone knew who these pirates were. It was understandable that Viserys went out to attack these navy ships that had removed their flags. The other side suffered a great loss, but could only swallow their anger. What else could they do? Admit that he was a pirate? But Viserys went out 2 nights ago, and he never came back. However, John Clinton knew everything, and knew that Viserys flew to the Castle of Sol. Since the Pentus garrison could not go out of the city to fight and defeat the Dothraki, and dragging it out was not a solution, he would first solve the war on the other side, and then bring the people there to help from inside and outside to lift the siege of Pentus. At this time, a man knocked on the door, then pushed it open and walked in. "My lord, I pried open the mouths of the prisoners I captured 2 days ago." Ramsay, with black hair and a gloomy face, sat in the chair opposite John Connington and spoke. Chapter 277, Withdrawal. One night not long ago, a big event happened in Pentus. That is, some family members who were purged during the Bloody Night secretly returned to Pentus. They hid in the dark, bribed some soldiers, and hired many mercenaries. When the war came, they tried to seize the city gate and let the Dothraki rush in, but in the end, this rebellion was extinguished. Then Viserys was very angry and ordered Ramsay to investigate the matter thoroughly. Ramsay has been busy with such things recently. After all, it is Ramsay's responsibility that these surviving members of the purged governor's family can sneak into Pentus to make trouble. Does it have anything to do with the tattered prince? John Connington was very busy, writing and drawing on paper, and asked without raising his head. John suspected that this matter had something to do with the tattered prince. After all, the fact that these surviving members of the governor's family could hide from the eyes of the guards and sneak into Pentus was enough to show that there was a big problem with the bureaucratic system. However, suspicion is just suspicion, and he can't produce evidence. After all, the person who took up the butcher knife and attacked the governor's family the most cruelly during the Bloody Night was the tattered prince. Logically speaking, there is a deep blood feud between the two. The governor's family hates the tattered prince to the bone, and it is impossible for them to cooperate. But John always feels that something is wrong, but he can't say what. No. However, Ramsay Snow heard John's question, shook his head slightly and said, "This matter was not traced to the tattered prince in the end." Ramsay pried open the mouths of those prisoners and eventually tracked down many people along this line. However, the forces behind the other party were also very alert. After discovering Ramsay's pursuit, they decisively chose to cut off their tails and survive, and the entire clue was cut cleanly. Before Ramsay found the remaining people, they were killed, so it was difficult for Ramsay to continue to track down along this clue. And the tattered prince has behaved well during this period, and it is difficult to see any problems. Is that so? John paused his pen after hearing Ramsay's words, thought for a moment and sighed. Then he asked again, "Well, the princess from Dawn and the Sand Snakes, have they made any unusual moves recently?" "No." Ramsay also shook his head. Princess Irian and the Sand Snake sisters haven't left the palace much recently. At most, they climbed up to the top of the city to look at the Dothraki who surrounded Pentus. Not long ago, Viserys was about to leave Pentus on a dragon. Irian wanted to ride the dragon with him, but it seemed that Balerion refused. Jon didn't know the specific details, but it was obvious that not everyone could ride a dragon. Irian didn't have the blood of the Dragon King, so naturally she couldn't get the dragon's recognition. The dragon was very proud, and it was not enough to rely on Viserys' face, and he had to pay more. And Jon's pen didn't stop, and his thoughts unconsciously came here. When Balerion was in Pentus, Jon also took the little boy to try to get to know the huge black dragon. But it was obvious that Egan also could not get Balerion's recognition, but his attitude was not very bad. Jon had actually prepared himself mentally before. Balerion already had a partner, that is, Rhaegar's brother, the current king, and not every Targaryen can get the dragon's recognition. But although Jon had been mentally prepared, he was still a little disappointed. And this disappointment was even more obvious in little Egan. The dragon did not recognize him. Jon was slightly distracted. Lord Jon. Then I will leave first. The head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, who was wrapped in a black robe and sitting opposite him, stood up and nodded slightly. Well, okay. The grey red-haired man also nodded. Then Ramsay, wearing a black robe, turned and left Jon Connington's office. Since Jon temporarily took over the military and political power of Pentus, Ramsay has been much busier than before, and he has to come to Jon's office every day to explain his work. In fact, it was not just Ramsay. Everyone in the palace and even the whole of Pentus, from government officials and generals in the army to ordinary soldiers and merchants, became busy without realizing it. Jon Connington fully demonstrated the meticulous characteristics of his character, and he was serious about everything, no matter how big or small. Jon may be more adept at handling government affairs than Viserys, and more professional than Lord Jeffrey, who is now nominally the Prime Minister, but in fact, has almost given up power, because of his old age and the injuries he suffered in the Battle of Dragonstone. Viserys handed the city to Jon when he left Pentus. And now it seems that Jon has handled everything well. Year 291 of the Egan calendar. June. Time flies. The former Gordahil is now the Castle of Sol, near the Three Forks River, which has almost become a nightmare for the Dothraki. The Dothraki, who have been galloping on the continent of Essos for 2 consecutive wars, have hit a wall here. Even the bloody battles, with a total of 20,000 to 30,000 Dothraki killed in the 2 wars, truly became a mass grave for the Dothraki. After winning the war, Viserys let the soldiers rest for a day. He distributed the rewards brought by Oberyn, and then the army marched towards Pentus. 2 dragons flew in the sky, and on the ground was the endless Targaryen army. They held high the banner of 3-headed fire dragons, wearing black and red armor, and marching in neat steps. They formed a winding long snake, and the cavalry on horseback cruised on both sides of the team, shouting something loudly. The slow and heavy baggage carts followed in the middle and rear of the army, and were protected in the center by the army. In front, it was not far from Pentus. The Dothraki had received the news of the defeat of the other side a few days ago. Then Muzzakal did not hesitate, and led the remaining 50,000 Dothraki warriors to retreat towards me. The other 2, Kaljako and Kalpono, rarely objected. 50,000 Dothraki were still fighting in the wild against 20,000 Targaryen regular troops. Logically, they should not have to retreat. However, the Dothraki had a natural fear of dragons, and the presence of dragons would scare their horses into breaking down. Therefore, the Dothraki felt that there was no possibility of winning this battle, so they ran very cleanly. As for the people, who had been besieged in Pentus for a month and a half, they were all shocked when they saw that the Dothraki outside the city had all begun to dismantle their tents and prepare to retreat. Are the Dothraki trying to trick us? Jon Connington personally put on his armor and climbed to the top of the city to wait and see. Or, has there been any change in the situation on your side? Chapter 278 Trap. I have to say that Jon's overall view is quite good. Seeing the Dothraki retreat, he easily guessed that something had happened on another battlefield. Otherwise, these Dothraki who came all the way with great fanfare would definitely not be willing to escape in disgrace. Of course, this does not rule out that the Dothraki were luring them into the trap in advance. If the defenders in Pentus dared to chase them out, they would be killed without a single piece of armor left, and then the city would be captured. If you just look at the Dothraki retreating slowly outside, it really looks like a fake show. Although John Clinton is not very old, he is also an old commander with rich experience. Of course, he will not take the initiative to be fooled. And what kind of soldiers do others bring to the field with the Dothraki? The unsullied, at least they are elite soldiers. And what kind of army is left for him in Pentus? A group of mercenaries and a wasteful defender. Even if John Clinton has the courage to chase them out, I'm afraid these soldiers don't have the courage to follow him out of the city. So the city of Pentus decisively chose to stay put. And outside the city, among the sparsely retreating Dothraki, the grey-haired Mozakal sat on his warhorse with the reins on, looking at the tall city wall of Pentus quietly, without the slightest intention of chasing out. He sighed slightly. He was unwilling to fail. However, this was their only chance to capture the city, but the defenders in the city did not fall for it, and Mozakal had no other choice. He could not force John to chase out and fall into his trap. War itself is a process of intrigue and deception. If you can't deceive people, you can only pretend to be real. After all, the dragon-riding Khal and his Khaleesi and 20,000 troops are on their way and have cut off their retreat. The Dothraki can only break out in the direction of me, turn around and fight back. But this idea only appeared in Mozakal's mind for a second. Then he thought of the huge monster that flew over his head that day, the pillars of fire that fell from the sky and bombarded the earth, and countless tribesmen wailed in the flames. Forget it. Mozakal hurriedly shook his grey head and drove this terrible thought out of his mind. Retreat. Then the old Khal sighed, turned his horse's head, and squeezed his legs on the horse's belly. Ta 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 ta. The warhorse went away. The Dothraki came and went quickly. After all, they were a nation on horseback, and the camp they set up was very simple. They took away what they could take away, and the rest that could not be taken down was simply thrown here and thrown away, and then they would rob others. Then, in the evening, the Dothraki disappeared outside the city of Pentus. It seems that the Dothraki have really retreated. The ragged prince who had been hiding in the repaired prince's palace for these days finally came out. Some time ago, the tattered prince was very low-key, never leaving the house. As the prince of Pentus, it was as if he didn't know that the Dothraki had besieged the city. He was even worse than the nominal prince in the past. The nominal prince would go to the top of the city to pretend to boost morale when the city-state was in trouble. However, the tattered prince actually had no effect in boosting morale. After all, everyone knew his current situation. Regardless of whether he was sidelined or not, he actually had no real power in his hands, not to mention that he had seized the position of prince by force. Those mercenaries also committed many crimes during the bloody night. Not only the governor's family, but many citizen families were also attacked. Ordinary civilians could not tell the difference between other mercenaries and the windblown, so they all put the blame on the head of the mercenary leader. And now, the tattered prince also received the news of the Dothraki retreat, and I don't know why he suddenly ran out. He even ran to the top of the city to watch, looking at the back of the Dothraki going away with a complicated expression. My lord, you don't seem that happy. John Connington, who was standing aside, was wearing armor and holding the hilt of his sword with one hand, with a look of doubt on his face. The grey-haired old man heard the words of the actual ruler of Pentus, and his face changed slightly, and he shook his head hurriedly. No, I'm very happy that the Dothraki have withdrawn, but it is a pity that the old man did not personally go into battle to repel these invaders. Really? John Connington heard the explanation of the tattered prince, frowned slightly, but did not say much. In fact, as long as the tattered prince did not commit suicide, Viserys would definitely not take the initiative to attack him. John has worked with this king for a while, and he has some understanding of his temper. Rewards and punishments are clear. Rewards are given for merits, and punishments are given for mistakes. Since he promised the tattered prince to make him the prince of Pentus, Viserys would not easily break his promise. They certainly would not sacrifice the tattered prince to the gods just because they lost the battle, or there were natural disasters, man-made disasters, floods, earthquakes, or poor harvests. Time passed quickly. 2 more days passed. The Dothraki retreated, and the reinforcement finally arrived. Pentus still kept its gates closed for the past few days, fearing that the Dothraki would suddenly come back and attack them. And 2 days later, woo, the desolate sound of the horn broke the silence in the city. What happened? Have the Dothraki fought back again? There were many refugees in Pentus whose homes were destroyed by the Dothraki. They were driven to the city of Pentus. Later, John personally led the cavalry out, repelled the Dothraki, and sheltered these refugees in the city. Gods bless you. The sound of the horn outside the city awakened the fear in the hearts of these poor refugees, and they took the relief food and hid in the corners of the city wall and trembled. The soldiers on the top of the city saw a scene completely different from what the refugees had imagined. The top of Pentus suddenly erupted with cheers that resounded through the sky, and the soldiers hugged each other excitedly and laughed. We won. We defeated the Dothraki, because they saw a flying figure in the distant sky. Their king has 3 dragons. This is something that no other city-states in the world can have, and the soldiers of Pentus are even proud of it. The travelers and merchants who came to Pentus for the first time actually wanted to see the legendary dragon. However, it was difficult for them to see the dragon. After all, Balerion rarely stayed in Pentus for too long. It was too constrained here. The forest and the sea outside the city were its paradise. However, the gate guards of Pentus could pat their chests and brag to these inquiring travelers with pride on their faces, as if Viserys was a relative of their own. In the distant sky, a giant dragon flew in the air and roared. The Targaryen army, which seemed to have no end on the horizon, gradually appeared in people's sight. Chapter 279 Reinforcement enter the city. Woo! The horn sounded melodiously. The army was approaching the city. The leading Targaryen general rode on horseback, holding the reins with one hand, his dark hair fluttering in the wind. Me watched the gate of Pentus, which had been closed for a month and a half, finally rumble open. Enter the city. Then he gave an order, and urged his horse to go into the city first. Hoo 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 hoo. The armor rubbed against each other, and the neat footsteps sounded. The Targaryen army officially entered the city of Pentus. John Connington and the Tattered Prince personally came to the city gate to greet them. The first to enter the city were a team of knights in plate armor, and their war horses were also covered with full body chainmail. The sound of horse hooves stepped heavily on the bluestone road in the city. The temperature in Pentus was not high in winter, and white mist sprayed out of the thick nostrils of the war horses. The knights on horseback were wearing shining helmets and armor, holding spears and shields, with long swords on their waists, and were fully armed to the teeth. There was a conspicuous 3-headed dragon emblem on the chest of the armor. What a strong army. John Connington looked at the Targaryen army entering the city with an envious expression in his eyes. This army was even more elite than the royal army he led to resist the usurper when he was the prime minister of the 7 kingdoms. At that time, the Targaryen dynasty was already on the verge of collapse. The nobles were disunited and could not be relied on, and the army of the Reach was also weak. The Tattered Prince, who followed John, looked at the Targaryen army entering the city, and his expression became even uglier. He and Viserys had an agreement that once the plan succeeded, Pentus would belong to him, and Pentus would express submission to Targaryen and become part of the kingdom. However, now, only more than half a year has passed, and the city has gradually slipped out of his control. There is no way. The Tattered Prince's hand was not as strong as Viserys's, so he could only be forced to swallow his anger. After all, whoever has soldiers and generals in his hands has more say, and Viserys not only has these, but also dragons. In fact, the Tattered Prince's idea was unrealistic from the beginning, and even too idealistic. How could he compete with Viserys, who had more than 30,000 soldiers at the time, with only more than 2,000 people in the Windblown? This has nothing to do with the level of means, it is just a difference in strength. The Tattered Prince still wanted to compete with the other party, but the other party could break his wrist with one move. It would be fine if the Tattered Prince was given some time to develop. After all, the city of Pentus has a large population and huge development potential. The Tattered Prince has a lot of wealth in his hands, and can easily expand his army. But the pity is that, after taking over the city, Viserys has never left Pentus. Viserys sits in Pentus for a day, and the Tattered Prince can only rely on others and obey. So he missed the best and only opportunity for development, and fell to the present situation. He was unwilling and angry. However, Facing these arrogant soldiers with murderous and arrogant faces, Prince Tattered restrained all his temper. He has led the army for half his life, and he can naturally see that these soldiers are victorious. Not only are their helmets and armors bright and their weapons sophisticated, but these soldiers have a victorious aura, and everyone's face is full of confidence. It is difficult for a non-victorious army to have such a momentum. Viserys has such an army, which is indeed not something he can contend with. His wind-blown core can almost be said to be shattered at the touch of a button when facing such an army. What's more, the wind-blown core is now out of his control, and even his left and right arms, Denzodahan and Cargo, are gradually disobeying his orders. Prince Tattered looked at the elite divisions passing by him, and then sighed dejectedly. Not just Jon and Prince Tattered. The Pentis defenders on the top of the city and the civilians in Pentis were also watching the Targaryen army entering the city on both sides of the road. It can be said that the streets were empty. These Targaryen troops were carrying the flag of the three-headed dragon, and the excellent equipment on their bodies made the defenders drool. They thought that their equipment was good enough, but they didn't expect that His Majesty the King would spend more money on his own army. The civilians of Pentis and the refugees who came here also lined the streets to welcome them. Although Pentis has changed hands for half a year, this is the first time that the citizens of Pentis have seen the Targaryen army enter the city. Except for the more than 200 guards that Viserys brought into the city, the rest of the army still maintained the previous system. Viserys abided by the original agreement with the Tattered Prince, and the Targaryen army did not enter Pentis. However, now Viserys just took the excuse of war to let the army lift the siege of Pentis and enter the city. This is also one of the reasons why the Tattered Prince looked so ugly just now. What a powerful army. No wonder they were able to defeat those vicious Dothraki. The citizens of Pentis were talking about it, shocked by the Targaryen army. Gods bless them. May His Majesty the King regain his throne. Others prayed to the gods out of gratitude. Cook. Didn't you say that His Majesty was a murderer half a year ago? A neighbor recognized the person who was praying. Half a year ago after the Bloody Night, he cursed the current king as a murderer and murdered the governors of Pentis. If the governors had not monopolized all walks of life, where would he get a job? This is his blessing. However, his father was burned to death by the tyrant's dragon flame. But the neighbor didn't expect that only half a year had passed, and Cook, who once hated Viserys to the core, actually began to pray for the Targaryen army. Don't talk nonsense. However, Cook, who was dressed in a grey robe, was shocked when he heard his neighbor's words. He looked around and found that no one was paying attention. He was relieved and snorted coldly. HMPH. What do you know? Your Majesty killed those blood-sucking governors and lifted restrictions on all walks of life so that we can make more wealth. The governors who monopolized all aspects of Pentis' industry were eliminated along with their families, and there were huge vacancies in these once monopolized industries. Although Viserys confiscated the assets of the governors, he did not continue to monopolize. Instead, he sold them at a discount to stimulate economic recovery in a short period of time. Cook had learned this skill as a worker for a governor and successfully opened a small shop 3 months ago. Today's income is many times more than when he worked for the governor. It's just that he is a little more worried, but Cook still sincerely thanks Viserys for creating all this for them. Your Majesty is a truly wise king. May he live long. Chapter 280. Empty streets. No one paid attention to the flattery of the two ordinary citizens in the city. After the Targaryen army entered the city, Jon Connington, who was greeted at the gate, soon discovered that Viserys did not seem to follow them into the city. He was slightly nervous, but then he saw a green dragon that was much smaller than Valyrian, but still huge compared to humans, flying back. Regal's huge shadow covered the ground. Its scales were ancient bronze, like moss in the deep forest at dusk, and these scales reflected the luster like jade. Its horns, wing bones and crests were golden, while its teeth and claws were black. Its bronze eyes were brighter than the polished shield, shining because of its own heat. Ho! Regal let out a melodious roar that spread far away, and flew directly to the Nine Towers Palace facing the sea in the distance. This is. The people of the entire Pentis also heard the dragon's roar, and looked up at the sky. It was not until then that they realized that the returning dragon was not the huge black dragon. "This is not your majesty's mount. Which princess is this?" The man with long grey red hair stood at the gate of the city, took a few steps forward, shielded his eyes from the dazzling sunlight, and looked up at the dragon that was gradually going away. He was slightly shocked. Just now, when John was far away from the top of the city, he saw the figure of a dragon in the sky. He thought it was Viserys who had returned victorious, but he didn't expect that this dragon was not Valyrian. He knew that there were 3 dragons in the Targaryen family. In addition to Valyrian, the dragon that Viserys rode, there were 2 dragons belonging to 2 princesses. One was the mother of dragons who hatched the dragon herself, the king's sister, Princess Daenerys Targaryen. The other was Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the eldest daughter of Prince Rhaegar of the previous dynasty. Because of age and other complex considerations, Viserys even ignored the seniority and directly canonized Rhaenys as the eldest princess of the new dynasty. And when Viserys made this decision, no one jumped out to refute it. This also indirectly shows the strong position of His Majesty the King within the new dynasty. If Viserys was still sitting on the Iron Throne in Westeros, he would dare to make such a decision, which would probably immediately cause opposition from a large number of conservatives. The old scholars of the Old Town Academy, the Archbishop of the Starry Sept, and the archbishops below, etc., all jumped out impatiently and accused His Majesty the King of ignoring the order of seniority and age. Because as a tradition of Westeros, if it is easily touched, it will affect the interests of many people. They will all become obstacles to Viserys' gradual reform, throwing stones to test the water. However, here, and alas, the germination of the new dynasty, no one dared to jump out to oppose Viserys' decision. His position was very strong, and it was no longer the time when he was in power, when he was young. After the canonization of Rhaenys, Viserys started the road of reform with great courage and determination. The founding monarchs often have such strong characteristics, and now the entire Targaryen actually depends on him alone. That's why his enemies all wanted to kill Viserys, and they would not hesitate to use any despicable means. Because assassinating either Rhaenys or Daenerys could not shake the foundation of this new dynasty. Although Viserys valued his 2 sisters, he was the core in the final analysis. The Targaryen army's entry into the city caused a sensation, and Rhaenys' airborne landing in the city on Regal caused the streets to be deserted. And Viserys, who did not follow the army back to the city, was naturally not missing. He was now flying above the clouds on Valyrian's back, well hidden. Viserys looked at the endless Dothraki below, trying to distinguish which one of them was their Khal. However, the other Khal was very shrewd, and fully learned the painful lessons of Khal Zico and Khal Moro. They hid in the crowd like a drop of water merging into the sea, inconspicuous, and Viserys could not find the other's trace. Now Viserys is riding a dragon to track the Dothraki's escape route, fearing that the other side will make a feint to the east and attack in the west. Although he had prepared a little bit in advance, the sudden retreat of the Dothraki still caught Viserys off guard. After all, 50,000 Dothraki are still a powerful force. He was ready to fight, but he didn't expect the other side to slip away without saying a word. Then Viserys asked Oberyn and Rhaenys to lead the legion to the city of Pentos to stabilize the situation. By the way, he took this opportunity to directly station the Targaryen army in the city and replace the previous useless garrisons. He continued to chase the Dothraki's retreat and drove them out of the area near Pentos. Otherwise, the Dothraki would use their mobility to make a feint to the east and attack in the west, or kill them back. He couldn't bear it. After all, most of the Targaryen army was infantry, and they were well equipped and wearing heavy armor. 2 feet could not outrun 4 feet, and the enemy came and went without a trace. And there were only 2 people in the Targaryen army who could do this job. One was Viserys and the other was Rhaenys. Viserys was worried that Rhaenys would ride a dragon alone to chase the enemy. He was even afraid that the girl would get lost in the sky. It would be fine if there were troops on the ground following her. If there were no coordinates, God knew where this silly girl would fly with the Dothraki, and whether she could find her way back. Therefore, this job fell on Viserys alone. Although the war was over, he still rode a dragon alone to chase the Dothraki. From time to time, he swooped down and spit out 2 mouthfuls of dragon flames, driving these Dothraki to continue running forward. The huge shadow of the dragon shrouded the ground, and Valyrian stretched his neck, spread his wings and roared. and below was the magnificent sound of thousands of horses galloping. Boom boom hey. From time to time, shouts in the Dothraki language were heard. The shadow of the dragon was shrouding all the Dothraki who were covered by the dragon's shadow. They were desperately driving their horses, and they were in a panic, fearing that a mouthful of dragon flame would fall from their heads. Viserys rode a dragon alone to chase 50,000 Dothraki, but they had no way to deal with it. Bows and arrows could not break the dragon's scales, and the giant crossbow that could break the dragon's defense had long been thrown to Pentis by them, because it was not convenient to escape with such siege weapons. Chapter 281, Driven Away. The siege crossbow was thrown away by the Dothraki, and the Targaryen army got a free advantage. As for the Braavosi who helped them build siege weapons in the tribe, they were directly detained by these Khals. This time, the Dothraki not only did not gain any benefits from the expedition, but also suffered a lot. These hundreds of Braavosi craftsmen and soldiers were sold as slaves as compensation. As for whether the Braavosi would retaliate, revenge, the Dothraki have never been afraid of revenge. If they have the guts, let these Braavosi come to these Dothraki to collect the debt. The three Khals were really stubborn on this issue. They justified their allies, and then walked away. The Dothraki were afraid of Viserys, because he had dragons. But there was nothing to be afraid of in Braavosi, and their invincible fleet could not sail to the Dothraki sea. Boom. Then a dazzling pillar of fire fell from the sky, directly drowned the countless Dothraki who were running desperately in their horses. The shrill screams sounded again, accompanied by the flying of the dragon. The fire column split the Dothraki formation, crushing the withered and rotten, as if cutting the sea surface. The tide surged to both sides, leaving a deep scar on this vast land. Then the dragon spread its wings again, and raised the wind, pulling up the height, and flying straight into the sky, and a low roar sounded from the sky. Rumble, the horses on the ground, are still running wildly. Countless Dothraki who escaped by chance raised their heads on their horses. Then they saw the huge figure shuttled above the clouds, and flew towards the distance. Viserys left. He chased the Dothraki for hundreds of miles in one breath, and set fire to a large number of Dothraki warriors several times during the period, and drove them towards me. In fact, it was not that Viserys had a grudge against me, and did it on purpose. Instead, the Dothraki chose to run in this direction. He had no choice but to chase them from behind in a hurry. On the ground, the dragon-riding Khal finally left. Countless Dothraki on the ground saw the dragon flying into the clouds and gradually disappearing, and then breathed a sigh of relief. This battle really made them timid. Although the warriors on the grassland were brave and not afraid of death, they could not face such an unsolvable opponent. They never thought that they would face the problem of air supremacy in this era of scimitars and bows. The existence of the dragon was like a sword of Damocles hovering over their heads. It could come down at any time to harvest a wave of their lives, and they had no way to deal with the opponent, which greatly hit the morale of the Dothraki. Not being afraid of death does not mean wanting to die, but there was nothing they could do about it. Finally gone. The three Khals hiding in the Khals disguised as ordinary tribesmen with their blood guards breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Viserys' back going away, and then they felt deeply ashamed. When had they ever been humiliated like this, being chased like a dog? You too. Are we going back like this? After a long silence, Khal Pono spoke first. There was a hint of reluctance and resentment in his voice. This time, they decided to attack Pentis. After receiving a lot of gold, silver and jewelry from Braavos, they thought Pentis was still as cowardly as before, and would come to ask for peace with a lot of gold after a casual fight, but they didn't expect to kick a steel plate this time. 80,000 Dothraki warriors swore an oath to the Mother of Mountains, with the stars in the sky as witnesses, and marched to Pentis in a mighty expedition, but then they were beaten and bloodied, and two Khals died, and they fled in disgrace. If they fled back to the Dothraki Sea like this, I'm afraid that the three Khals, Khal Moza, Khal Jacko and Khal Pono, would all become the laughing stock of the Great Grass Sea. Pono Ko was outspoken, and took the initiative to speak. Ko Jacko looked at him, rolled his eyes slightly, and did not speak. Then all eyes fell on Ko Mozo. Although his KLS was not large, the old Ko was the leader of the coalition this time, because he was experienced. Moreover, Pono Ko and Ko Jacko had a grudge. They did not accept each other and would definitely not allow the other to become the leader, so Komoso had to come. The old Ko heard Kono's words and hesitated for a moment. Then he raised his head and looked into the distance. At this moment, they were on a bulging hill on the Great Plain. Looking far away, they could see a touch of blue in the distance, which was where the sea and the sky met. They had now fled to the vicinity of the Mie Sea in one breath, and they had entered the sphere of influence of Mie, one of the free trade cities. There were also many towns and villages around Mie, and Mie itself was also very rich. Komoso hesitated for a moment, then spoke. The poisonous water is ahead. Then he asked his blood ridders to bring a map and explained the current location. In front of them, they could reach Mie by bypassing the lake that flows into the Mie Sea. Then the old cow continued to speak. In that case, since we are here, we must take something back to the Great Grass Sea, right? When Ponokal and Jakokal heard his words, they immediately understood. The Dothraki are still very good at robbing, and they can even understand with just one look. Okay, no problem. Ponokal and Jakokal both nodded and agreed immediately, and they hit it off so well. Then, accompanied by the Bloodridder's orders, the Dothraki who had fled for a long time once again cheered up and boosted their morale and blew the horn. Woo! The sound of horse hooves roared, and the earth trembled. Because the war had lost thousands of people, there were only a little over 40,000 Dothraki left, and now they were heading towards Mie. They decided to get what they should receive from Pentus from Mie. The Governor's Council of Mie, which was composed of wealthy merchants and local nobles, did not know that they were about to face bad luck. The city of Mie was still prosperous, and it was not aware that more than 40,000 ferocious Dothraki were heading towards Mie, and in the distant Pentus. Rhaenys also met her cousin for the first time, Princess Irian Martell from Dorne. Their uncle Prince Oberyn introduced them. She is the daughter of your Aunt Elia, your cousin. Now the eldest princess, Her Highness Rhaenys Targaryen. Chapter 282 Dismissal. The golden spear emblem on the chest and the sword and shield medal of the Legion commander reflected dazzling golden light in the sun. The Targaryen army has officially entered the city and directly took over the streets and walls of Pentus. Jon Connington, who can call the wind and rain in Pentus, never expected that Oberyn Nymeris Martell, the Prince of Dorne, who he had just met and always heard about, would be so powerful. As soon as he arrived, he dismissed Jon Connington from all his positions and did not allow Jon to raise any opinions. Because Jon's official position in the new dynasty is only Viserys' personal advisor, he has no official position. As the real Legion commander wearing the golden sword and shield medal, Oberyn's status is only lower than that of Earl Joffrey, who is nominally the prime minister besides Viserys. However, Joffrey, who had made contributions to the Targaryen family and protected Queen Rhaella's orphans and widows, is old and almost no longer manages things, except staying in Andalus. Therefore, Oberyn is now second to none. Although another Legion commander, Bessie, is at the same level as him, Bessie does not seem to like to be too greedy in politics. When Oberyn dismissed Jon, he did not interrupt, but just watched it quietly. He knew that Oberyn was not making trouble, but simply did not trust this person. Oberyn naturally knew that he was the former Prime Minister of the Earl of Griffin's Nest, and he also knew that Jon Connington lost the Battle of the Bells. However, Oberyn did not trust the other party because of the defeat, but because the other party brought a little Egon who came from nowhere to Viserys, although the other party was nominally his sister's son and his nephew. However, no one can confirm this point. With Oberyn's smart mind, that obtained 6 Maester links in the Citadel, of course, he thought that there was a high possibility that this matter was strange. He loved his sister very much, so he hated that someone would make a fuss in the name of her child. Egon is dead, killed by the villain named Gregor Clegane, nicknamed the Mountain. He will personally judge the other party. However, the first thing he did after arriving in Pentus was not to see the Mountain, because he was afraid that he would be unable to resist torturing him to death if he saw him now. Then he controlled his emotions, dismissed Jon first, and then introduced Irian and Rhaenys, a pair of cousins, to each other. Now, the power of Pentus was transferred to the hands of the man in front of him in less than half a day. The tattered prince never expected that he had not yet dealt with Jon Connington, and then there came a more powerful Oberyn, who directly dismissed Jon from his position. The old man of the Windblown felt that he had a lot of grievances, but nowhere to tell. She is the eldest daughter of your uncle Prince Doran, Princess Irian. Oberyn had taken off his armor at this moment, wearing a gorgeous and well-fitting sand yellow noble costume, with black and shiny hair tied back, with a touch of white hair in the middle, tied into a short braid. He looked at Rhaenys on his left hand. The girl was dressed in military uniform and bright and well-fitting women's armor. Her long brown hair hung on the cold armor. She wore a short sword inlaid with gems on her waist. Her dark eyes were bright, and she looked heroic. Although Rhaenys was a few years younger than Irian and her figure was a little more petite, she had just walked down from the battlefield not long ago, so she was even more imposing after wearing the armor. Then Oberyn turned his head and looked at his niece on the right. Compared with Rhaenys, Irian looked more like a princess of noble status. Irian had a good figure, big breasts and beautiful face. Her every move was full of feminine charm, attracting the attention of all men. Irian was wearing a sandy yellow dress, similar to the clothes on Oberyn, both of which were full of very strong Dornish style. The two girls looked at each other. Then, as the cousin, Irian behaved more gracefully. She was the first to show a decent smile, and then took the initiative to reach out and hold her sister's hand. Rhaenys, my sister. I heard your name from my uncle a long time ago. You are more beautiful than I thought. Irian took up Rhaenys' cold hand covered with steel, and then gently hugged the girl with long brown hair in front of her. She had indeed heard her father Doran and uncle Oberyn mention this name many times, because this was a daughter left behind by her aunt Elia. And Rhaenys also gently hugged the strange girl in front of her. She had known for a long time that she had a cousin, and because of many complicated reasons, she had to marry her brother. Although Rhaenys felt a little uncomfortable, she was born in the Targaryen royal family, and she often had to be independent. She was destined to be more mature than other girls of the same age. She understood that this was a condition that Viserys could not refuse. So even if she felt a little uncomfortable, she would not act willfully. And the other party was also her relative, a cousin who was connected by blood. Nice to meet you, sister. You are also very beautiful. Rhaenys also spoke. The atmosphere of the first recognition of the sisters seemed to be happy. Oberyn, who was standing aside, had been observing the expressions on the faces of the cousins, and then heaved a sigh of relief. Irian was to be Viserys' queen in the future, and Rhaenys had a very good relationship with Viserys. When she spoke, Viserys would really listen carefully. Therefore, the relationship between these two girls with mortal blood was very important to the stability of the Targaryen dynasty's harem and the interests of Dorne. This is your first time in Pentos, Rhaenys. Then the two girls chatted, and it was obvious that Oberyn didn't need to intervene too much in their communication. Irian was very smart, and the more beautiful the girl, the smarter she was. She knew that she had to have a good relationship with this girl before she met Rhaenys, which was very important for her to consolidate her position in the future. Therefore, when she first met Rhaenys, she certainly showed her enthusiasm. Soon Irian was going to take Rhaenys to walk around the palace. By the way, they went to several famous attractions in the city of Pentos, such as the Red Temple and the museum. The people of Pentos love art very much, and they have many precious paintings and sculptures. And he took Rhaenys to taste the most famous specialties of Pentos, the exquisitely made cakes and white amber wine. And Rhaenys naturally agreed, but the premise of going out to play was to take off the light armor on her body. Irian had already arranged a room for Rhaenys, right next to her room. Then the two girls walked into the depths of the palace. Chapter 283 2 months. A few days later, Viserys returned to Pentos on a dragon. Now the whole city was in a festive atmosphere. This was the only war in Pentos in the 80 or 90 years since the last war between Braavos and Pentos. And it was the first victory in a war in nearly 100 or 200 years. The people of Pentos had their backs broken by Braavos, and they never thought they could win the war. Therefore, defeating the Dothraki attack and driving away these bandits greatly boosted the morale of the city of Pentos. The citizens celebrated enthusiastically, and the refugees whose homes were destroyed by the Dothraki were gradually returning to their hometowns. Everyone was grateful to the Targaryen family for defeating the Dothraki, and even openly discussed whether the title of Prince of Pentos should be given to King Viserys. king of the Andals, the Roiner and the First Men, the legitimate ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm, Lord of Andalus, Prince of Pentus, and the seven-crowned true dragon Viserys Targaryen III. Viserys' current title is too long. Crown of the Seven Gods was a title he had publicly promoted, so it should be added to his official title, which also represents the belief in the seven gods. In other religious beliefs, the Red God believers promoted Viserys as the reincarnation of Azor Ahai, who would hold the Lightbringer to dispel darkness and save the world. Later, for some reason, it was promoted that he became the son of R'hllor, the Lord of Light, and was eventually called the Son of the Sun or the King of the Sunday. The Roiner people believe in all living things, and they believe that Viserys has been blessed by the Holy Spirit, so he can win every battle. As for the folks, Viserys also has titles such as Wise King, and the Dothraki people also gave Viserys a title of Khal the Dragon Rider. However, none of these were attached to his official title, but only circulated among the people. In response, the tattered prince hid in the prince's palace and remained quiet as a mascot, ignoring the voices of the outside world. Later, Viserys returned to Pentus and soon heard that Jon had been dismissed. However, he just nodded and didn't say much, and Oberyn was also doing things within the rules. But that night, Viserys still called Jon over and recognized his contribution in person. After all, Jon commanded the defense of Pentus and did not let the Dothraki attack, and he did not fall for it afterwards. During this period, he also made contributions to the overall management of materials and logistics. Therefore, Viserys temporarily appointed him as a member of the Royal Council. As the Minister of Justice, he has the right to attend important meetings, which is considered to be a formal position. Jon commanded the thousands of Pentus garrisons that were temporarily replaced by the Targaryen army, and they would not be easily dismissed by Oberyn as they were not long ago. At the same time, Viserys also rewarded Ramsay, who had made contributions in the Bloody Night and the subsequent Dothraki invasion. Viserys did not discriminate against him because of his legitimate status and treated him equally. However, Ramsay's contribution was not enough to be promoted to the Chief of Intelligence and attend the royal meeting. Therefore, Viserys only expanded the staff of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and allocated more soldiers to Ramsay to train him to become a member of the National Intelligence Agency. In this war, all the soldiers who made contributions and all those who worked hard behind the scenes received due rewards. The 20,000 Dothraki roaring warriors captured in the Battle of Hellfire also surrendered to the true dragon Khal in their mouths and sincerely expressed their willingness to become a member of the true dragon Khal's Khal. The dragon burned their Khal to death and also conquered the Dothraki who knelt down and surrendered. And Viserys also reaped the greatest results of this war. The 20,000 surrendered Dothraki were 20,000 light cavalrymen who brought their own horses, had excellent riding skills, and did not want wages. As long as they were provided with food and lodging, they were willing to follow Viserys. This was almost a pie in the sky, and Viserys was very happy, and then he formally incorporated them. However, such a large number of Dothraki were a hidden danger wherever they were placed, and it was not easy to split them up. These surrendered Dothraki were willing to obey the orders of the dragon riding Khal, but they could not obey the orders of other commanders such as Bessie or Oberyn, because they only surrendered to Viserys, or those who could ride a dragon. The Khaleesi who could also ride a dragon was naturally included in this list. There was no other way. Since these Dothraki could not be easily split up, Viserys commanded them personally. Then, in the southeast of Pentus, a place suitable for them to settle down was found on the Endless Plains. Since they chose to surrender to the real dragon Khal, they naturally could not live the nomadic life as before. Viserys asked the Dothraki to build a simple town similar to these Dothraki on this plain with lush grassland. It was probably some houses made of wood and straw, and some places that needed to be reinforced were made of stone. Although they were rather shabby, they were built by themselves, and the Dothraki did not despise them. After all, no matter how broken the house was, it was better than sleeping in a tent or sleeping on the ground during their nomadic period. Then, time passed quickly. In a blink of an eye, more than 2 months had passed. In August, Pentus' economic level was recovering rapidly, even surpassing the level before the Bloody Night. The Dothraki siege did not cause much damage to the city of Pentus. Now, more than half a year has passed, and it is actually recovering the damage caused by the turmoil of the bloody night. However, under the background of Vizori's stimulus policy and the disappearance of monopoly, Penta's economy has shown a rare thriving trend. The stagnant water that was once under the rule of the governors has now completely come alive and burst out with sufficient vitality. The economy quickly returned to its pre-turmoil level, and was still improving rapidly. A month ago, a piece of news that was like an earthquake reached Pentas. That was the 40,000 Dothraki remnants who were defeated by Pentas fled to the vicinity of the Mii Sea. They pretended to return to the Dothraki Sea, and demanded high protection fees from the Mii passing by. However, they took the opportunity to suddenly launch an attack. 40,000 Dothraki seized the gates of Mii, and poured into this prosperous trading city-state. Mii's Governor Council hastily organized soldiers to resist. However, the Golden Group, which always spoke like gold, actually tore up the contract on its own initiative, and led the Golden Group's mercenaries to escape from Mir and head towards Volantis. Therefore, Mii suffered a massacre that was 100 times more terrifying than the Bloody Night. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284, Mill's Sorrow. 40,000 roaring Dothraki warriors suddenly attacked and captured Mii. Then the three Khals ordered their people to burn, kill and loot wantonly for 3 days. They seemed to want to vent all the grievances they suffered in Pentas on Mii. Mii, a prosperous trading city known for its excellent handicrafts, encountered the most terrifying nightmare in 3 days. It is almost impossible to imagine it with human thinking, and the soul trembles for it. The sky of Mir is always wrapped in a thick fog of burning flames. The day and night are all dark, and even the coldest sea breeze cannot blow away the thick fog. The blazing fire reflects the entire sky in blood red. Under the flames and thick smoke, the Dothraki wielded their butcher knives wantonly, breaking through the noble families one by one, breaking into the homes of the citizens of Mii, raping and looting in the streets, and then chopping off their heads with a knife. The fire set by the Dothraki burned in Mii for a full half-month without being extinguished. In addition to the smoke of gunpowder, the air of the city-state was filled with the disgusting smell of blood. After the wanton bloody massacre, countless heads of Mii citizens and slaves were cast into Jingwen, and placed in the streets and alleys of Mii, revealing their hideous faces. Every household was smashed, looted, burned, and plundered. Only a few people who hid better and children who were not as tall as the wheels survived. A large number of young men and women were captured and made slaves. Even the Governor's Council Palace on Governor's Hill was captured by the Dothraki. The garrison held on for 3 days and finally fell. All the soldiers were beheaded, and the governors who did not have time to escape were hanged on the palace. Their bodies were not found until a few days after the Dothraki left, and finally some adventurers dared to go deep into the city of Mir and found them. However, their bodies had fallen to the ground, and had long been rotten. Mir encountered an unimaginable nightmare of horror, and was almost destroyed in the carnival feast of the Dothraki. After the 40,000 Dothraki burned, killed, looted, and captured a large number of slaves in Mii City, they finally left Mii with a lot of treasures and slaves, and returned to the Dothraki Sea. They will sell these Mii people to the slave bay east of the Dothraki Sea. The nightmare of horror that Mir encountered caused an uproar in the entire Western Free Trade City. It was like a magnitude 9 earthquake, which instantly caused an explosive sensation. No one expected such a thing to happen. After being frustrated in Pentas, the Dothraki actually raided Mii, broke into the city of Mii, and used the butcher knife to massacre the people of Mii. This was almost unimaginable to the nobles in the free trade city-states that mainly exchanged interests. Although they had done things like exterminating the clan at will, they had never done such a cruel thing as massacring the city. However, until this time, people seemed to remember that the Dothraki were just barbarians who had just left their hometown in the long history. The story of the kingdom of Sana seemed to be unfolding. What? Viserys was also shocked when he received the news in Pentas. He had never expected that such a thing would happen. Mii, a powerful trading city-state, was actually attacked and occupied by the Dothraki. Pentus is very close to me, and Viserys received the news faster than other forces except for the former members of the Three Daughters Kingdom. Then Viserys personally flew to Mir on a dragon. However, when Viserys rode Balerion and passed through the billowing smoke that enveloped the sky above me, he landed. The Dothraki and me had already left, leaving only the ruins that were slaughtered and destroyed. The citizens and children of me who had escaped the massacre looked at Viserys, who fell from the sky with empty and numb eyes. That look even frightened Viserys. Hell is on earth. Looking at the scene in front of him, such a sentence flashed through Viserys' mind. These damn murderers. Then, Viserys felt a little heavy and did not stay here any longer. He already knew what happened here and then flew back to Pentus on the dragon. What happened in me couldn't actually be blamed on Viserys. After all, they just defeated the invading enemy and the enemy was driven away and turned to attack me. If Pentus fell, it would probably not be much better than me. The once glorious kingdom of Sana is such a vivid example, and now it has been wiped off the face of the earth. The reason is that the Dothraki invaded their country and destroyed cities one by one. The capital of the kingdom of Sana, Shanath, was once known as a city of 1,000 towers, but now it is called Westvor in the Dothraki language, which means the city of parasites. Cassius, the caravan city, is now called Wugasamu, which means broken god. There is also Veslekatha, the rat city, Vesgladka, the dirty city, etc. These cities named in the Dothraki language are because they were destroyed by the Dothraki, and they were even insulted as the city of rats, diseases, and parasites. Now Mir is a newly destroyed city by the Dothraki. And now, more than a month and nearly 2 months have passed since me was massacred. In addition to several major trading city-states organizing their own fleets to enter the ruins, Pentus did not send anyone to go deep into it because Viserys had already been there in person. Viserys is considering the next direction of development. Mir is now in a complicated situation, and all forces have intervened in it. It can be said that it is a mixed bag. The armies of Tirosh and Lys first entered the ruins and controlled part of the city. Due to the situation, some small conflicts broke out between the two sides, and bloodshed occurred. Then, the Archon of Lantis, who was unwilling to be lonely, also sent the Tiger Robe army to the city of Mir. The Tiroshi army and the Lys army, which were on the verge of a war, immediately became united against the Volantis. Later, it was heard that the Bravas also sent a fleet with a large amount of relief supplies and had just entered the city of Mir. At the same time, there were rumors that a group of black-robed messengers from Koha who believed in the Black Goat God seemed to have smelled the smell. They wanted to take this opportunity to hold a bloody sacrifice in Mir, but the reason they said was to help the dead. After all, the Black Goat God is also one of the gods of death. Of course, these believers did not take the opportunity to reap the souls of the dead and offer them to their gods. The situation in Mir was too complicated, so Viserys did not intervene. He was still considering the previous question of whether to target Bravas or Westeros next. However, at this juncture, the messenger from Bravas arrived. Chapter 285. The Great Wall collapses. The footsteps outside the hall were clear. Tap, tap, tap. A man in a plain grey robe and short hair hurried into the Nine Towers Palace. Viserys was sitting on the throne and waiting quietly. Your Majesty. After the Bravas envoy entered the palace, he saw the silver-haired young man on the throne and immediately bowed. The Bravas envoy certainly came with the intention of reconciliation. Now that the power of the Targaryens has become increasingly powerful, it is not in the interests of Bravas to go to war with the Targaryens. Therefore, the Bravas envoy brought a ship of gold, silver and jewelry with a huge total value, and gave it to Viserys, hoping to ease the relationship between the two sides. Of course, the Bravas envoy naturally did not come to Pentus with the theme of easing relations. Although many people knew it well, they did not expose it directly after all. The Bravas people should bear a great responsibility for the massacre that Mir suffered, because it was the Dothraki hired by Bravas to attack Pentus. However, the Dothraki were frustrated in their attack on Pentus and lost the battle. They turned to raid Mir and launched a massacre in the city of Mir. But the Bravas people were unwilling to take this responsibility, and they didn't want to be nailed to the pillar of shame in history, so they naturally didn't want to admit these crimes. Behind closed doors, they eased relations. When the door was opened, Bravos claimed to the outside world that it was to celebrate the upcoming 16th name day of His Majesty Viserys Targaryen III. It was also a gift for his coming of age ceremony. Viserys' naming day is September 24th, and a grand celebration will be held in the city of Pentos. With the rapid development of Targaryen strength on the continent of Essos, Viserys' coming of age ceremony must be very grand. All forces, whether hostile or friendly, did not miss this opportunity to communicate, and sent envoys in advance, and are now on their way to Pentos. Although there had been some minor unpleasantness, the bearded monks had a good relationship with the Targaryens, because they helped Norvus put out the wildfires. They sent envoys. Although Koha was far away, he also sent people to join in the fun and communicate about trade-related issues. After the fall of Mia, the triangle stability of the three sister kingdoms collapsed. Lies and Tirosh are out at Fortat, and there is a war on the verge of breaking out. Therefore, both city-states hope to win over the Targaryens to support their sovereignty over the disputed land, and beware of Volantis, who is ready to move again. For this reason, the two city-states are also full of sincerity. The arrogant Volantis also sent an envoy. Although the two families once had deep conflicts, as the self-proclaimed eldest daughter of Valyria, Volantis once wanted to unite with Targaryens to conquer the continent of Essos and restore the Fortress of Freedom. However, they were rejected by Aegon the Conqueror, the then Targaryen leader. Then the army of Volantis began to attack Tirosh, and the war officially broke out. Aegon rode a dragon to participate in the war, and defeated the army of Volantis, so the two sides had a grudge. But now Volantis has gradually declined, and Targaryen has also been exiled to the continent of Essos. Volantis, ruled by the Elephant Party, seems to want to put aside the past grudges and contact Targaryen again. Therefore, they also came with a lot of sincerity and excellent negotiators. There is even an exiled prince from the distant Summer Islands, Zal Island. He is very similar to Viserys' past fate. He has dark skin, and wears a feather cloak. He is Prince Jarabathor, who came from King's Landing. There is still a month before His Majesty's coming of age ceremony. However, many delegations have gathered in the city of Pentos in a short period of time, and many are still on their way. But things happened one after another, just when Viserys had not yet considered whether to turn against Bravos. After all, such a major direction must be carefully considered, and it is definitely not something that can be decided on a whim. Moreover, with the wars happening one after another, Viserys must also consider the soldiers' war weariness and morale. At this time, another major event happened from Westeros across the Narrow Sea. An urgent intelligence was sent to Viserys in an urgent manner. This intelligence came from Westeros, and the content of the intelligence was also very simple. It was probably that the negotiations between the Wildlings and the Baratheon dynasty broke down, and the king beyond the wall blew the legendary Horn of Winter. Then a section of the wall collapsed, and hundreds of thousands of Wildlings poured into the north. And that night, King Robert seemed to be drunk. Instead of staying in the Black Castle, he was in a bad mood and secretly went to Mole's Town to spend the night. After hearing the news, Eddard Stark, the Duke of Winterfell, led a team of guards to leave the wall to look for Robert. Only Stannis stayed at Castle Black. That night, Castle Black collapsed, and Wildlings poured in. No one could confirm whether the unfortunate Stannis was alive or dead. Some people said that Stannis broke out of the siege under the desperate protection of the soldiers, while others said that he was simply killed by stones. The situation at that time was very chaotic, and it was difficult for the person who delivered the information to say clearly. Many of them were hearsay. However, it was really true that a small section of the wall collapsed, and hundreds of thousands of Wildlings poured into the north. Now the entire north has become a mess. In addition to the nobles who own castles, the villagers and farmers living outside the city are all in danger. Several villages have been massacred by Wildlings. However, it is said that King Robert and Duke Eddard are not in serious trouble. They were not at the wall that night, so they quickly organized the remnants and launched a counterattack against the Wildlings. The fighting power of the so-called hundreds of thousands of Wildlings was not actually very high, and they were quickly defeated by the regular army that had recovered. However, these victories did not help ease the chaos in the north. After all, there were too many Wildlings and too few regular troops. Hundreds of thousands of wildlings ran around, burning, killing, looting, and destroying everywhere. In fact, it was not easy to catch hundreds of thousands of pigs, let alone people. Moreover, the number of coalition forces brought by Robert was too small. The soldiers could not catch all the wildlings, even if they ran around east and west. They even encountered several ambushes by wildlings, and lost a lot of soldiers. When Viserys saw the intelligence in his hand, he was almost shocked beyond words. He did not expect that the situation in Westeros would suddenly change so dramatically, which was even more shocking than the destruction of Mia. What he did not expect was that the legendary Horn of Winter was actually useful. In his memory, wasn't this thing broken? Later, it was picked up by the direwolf White Ghost and Jon Snow during the expedition of the Night's Watch. Then he blew it a few times, but it didn't make any sound, and was then taken to the Citadel by Sam Tully. Chapter 286, Building a Fleet. The wall collapsed. The violent shock it caused was no less to Westeros than the slaughter of Myronessus. After all, the two sides were separated by the sea, and Viserys actually received the news a long time ago, while the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms learned the news earlier than Viserys. It was not until this time that they realized things were tricky. Limited by the backward tools for intelligence transmission, it takes time to brew an important message in this era. However, the reality is that important information often has a strong timeliness. Viserys held the heavy intelligence in his hand, his face solemn, and he could not tell whether he was happy or angry. To be honest, he did not have too much gloating in his heart, but just felt that things were a bit troublesome. The wall is the only barrier for humans to stop the White Walkers. The collapse of the wall means that it is much more difficult for humans to stop the White Walkers. Viserys hopes to see the Baratheon dynasty and the White Walkers fight each other to a loss, and then he can reap the benefits, not to see the White Walkers completely destroy the Seven Kingdoms. In that case, the whole of Westeros would probably be completely reduced to a den of ghosts, with humans dying and rampant, becoming an unmanageable situation, and even threatening the safety of humans on the narrow sea. And the problem that Viserys was still struggling with before, now it seems that there is no need to continue to struggle. Reality made a decision for him. How is the fleet being built now? Viserys finished reading the intelligence in his hand, then raised his head and asked. The Dragonstone fleet, which was loyal to the Targaryen family, encountered a surprise attack by the royal fleet led by Stannis on Dragonstone many years ago. The key to this battle was that Stannis bribed some soldiers and officers of the Dragonstone fleet, and the distant relatives of the Valerian family, who had been in a state of not taking sides, or expressing their opinions, suddenly turned to the side of Baratheon, and attacked the Targaryen fleet stationed on Dragonstone. This battle caused the Dragonstone fleet to be defeated and suffered heavy losses. It was forced to retreat to the coast of Bravos, abandoning Dragonstone, and also lost the ability to attack Westeros. The fleet's commander-in-chief, Earl Joffrey, was also shot in the chest during the fight, and was seriously injured. Although he was rescued later, he was left with a permanent root of illness, and the old injury would relapse from time to time. The fleet suffered heavy losses, and the only naval commander was seriously injured. If Viserys wanted to attack Westeros in the future, he would first need to restore the Dragonstone fleet. Therefore, in the past few years, the Targaryen family has been allocating a lot of funds to restore the size of the fleet, the total tonnage, the number of ships, and the number of soldiers on the ships. However, at that time, the Targaryen family only controlled the Andalus area, with only a small dock, and the shipbuilding industry was extremely backward. Without the corresponding technology and capabilities, it was impossible to build large tonnage ships. Later, with Viserys' single-handed meeting, 200 people captured the city, and all these problems were solved after they captured Pentos. Pentos has a very prosperous port, and there are trade exchanges with the Seven Kingdoms and even the Jade Sea. The shipbuilding industry is naturally very developed, with many skilled shipbuilders who can build warships of the largest tonnage, so the recovery plan of the Dragonstone fleet was restarted again. The flagship of the old generation of the Dragonstone fleet, the Black Death, gave up repairs because of severe injuries and retired gloriously. It is now docked in the small harbor of the Sentinel Tower. Now the new Black Death is being built. Its tonnage far exceeds that of its predecessors, and it is equipped with a large number of catapults and giant crossbows. At the same time, two other main battleships second only to the flagship of the new Black Death are being built in the shipyard of the port of Pentus. They are named after the dragons of Rhenes and Aeneas, Regal and Viserin. Hearing Viserys' question, John Clinton, who was sitting in the second seat on the left, was shocked. Then he sorted out the useful parts from the thick materials and handed them to Viserys. "Your Majesty, the 3 new ships were built in Pentus, and John Clinton had always been in charge before, so he knew a lot about these ships." Sitting diagonally opposite him, a Baron, who was on Viserys' right hand, was playing with the ring in his hand with some boredom, and at the same time he looked up at John Connington. He had just dismissed him 2 months ago, but John did not seem to have any resentment towards him. Instead, his attitude remained the same, not flattering but not distant, and even a little arrogant. No one in the palace liked him, but no one was not afraid of him either. In short, this person had no friends, and his personality was old-fashioned and rigorous. He would not form cliques, and he liked to act in a business-like manner in everything. A Baron even suspected that the reason why John did not resent him was because he thought that his dismissal was in accordance with the rules, because a Baron's official position was higher than his, and he had the power to do so. On the other side, Viserys looked at the information John gave him. His face was not very good, and his brows were slightly frowned. Because the construction progress of the 3 warships was a little behind expectations, John Connington may have seen that Viserys was a little unhappy, and he hesitated for a moment and explained, "Your Majesty, the progress of shipbuilding is behind schedule because of the siege some time ago. Some key raw materials could not be transported in. There is a reason why the construction of the 3 warships was a little slow. The city was besieged by the Dothraki some time ago, and many shipbuilding raw materials could not be transported in, so naturally the construction could not start. The 3 main battleships have very strict requirements on wood. They must be hard enough to withstand moisture and humidity. They cannot be shoddy, so a long time is wasted." "Yes, I know. John, urge them again, and let them speed up the progress." Viserys naturally knew what the reason was, that the progress of the shipbuilding was delayed, and then he frowned and spoke. "If it's slower in peacetime, it doesn't matter. But now the situation in Westeros has changed dramatically. The Great Wall suddenly collapsed, the wildlings poured into the north, and the coalition of the 7 kingdoms retreated to Winterfell, and captured the wildlings everywhere. The situation is changing rapidly now. We may be ready to set out on an expedition to Westeros at any time, whether it is to deal with the White Walkers or the usurpers. Even to kill them both at once. Warships are indispensable. Without a ship, Viserys could fly over, but his soldiers could not swim across the narrow sea. Therefore, as long as the warships were not in place, Viserys could only stare blankly and do nothing, even if he wanted to plot against Westeros. Chapter 287 Human Coalition. Now the situation in Westeros is really a mess. There are hundreds of wildling tribes, each with different cultures and even races. They don't gather together, but run around everywhere, because they know very well that they can't beat the regular army of the coalition with just the wooden sticks in their hands. The other side's swords are sharper, and they also have armor. Armor is a real killer, even more important than high quality weapons. A soldier in armor can easily deal with 5 or 6 farmers with wooden sticks. Therefore, from the beginning, Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, did not expect to really set up a battle formation to defeat the coalition of the 7 kingdoms head on. Their only chance is to capture Robert alive when the Great Wall collapses, and they can't even kill him. Because a dead king is just a fat man, the nobles of King's Landing can compromise with each other at any time and push out a new king to replace him. And a living king is an important hostage who can threaten them to withdraw their troops and extort land and food. But unfortunately, King Robert was very happy that night and went to hall before the battle. Mance Rayder actually didn't expect that the king would be so foolish. The plan failed due to a series of mistakes. However, since he couldn't catch the king alive, Mance Rayder already had a backup plan, so he changed direction immediately. The king beyond the wall directly ordered that, after crossing the Great Wall, the Wildling Kingdom would be divided into tribes, and hundreds of tribes would fight each other. No resistance, no war, just run south. Run as far as you can, the further south the better. Because the people behind the Great Wall don't know how terrible the White Walkers are, and the wildlings have fought with the White Walkers several times in the past few months. Every time they fought, the losses were extremely heavy, and they knew very well how terrible and terrifying the White Walkers were. Although they still have human faces, they are already two completely different beings from humans. They don't need to breathe or eat. They are not afraid of the cold, and Mance Rayder even saw a group of dead people walking out from under the sea. They really walked out, stepping on the seabed without swimming, because these people don't need to breathe. However, this is only a shallow sea. No one knows whether the water pressure of the deep sea can have an effect on these dead people, but this still makes Mance Rayder feel frightened. Moreover, these dead people will kill all the creatures they see, and it is difficult for birds and beasts to escape. Even with the gradual southward movement of the White Walkers from the land of eternal winter, the cold of death gradually invaded, and even the cold-resistant trees outside the wall would be frozen to death. These White Walkers and his servants are like the gods of death, and there is no life wherever they go. Therefore, these wildlings can't raise any resistance to the White Walkers at all, and just want to leave the Great Wall and flee all the way south. Of course, it would be better if they could attack a port halfway and seize the ship to escape to the other side of the narrow sea. This is Mance Rayder's second plan. The current situation in the north is that hundreds of thousands of wildlings have crossed the Great Wall and started to destroy everywhere, attack villages, and plunder food like locusts. They even robbed a lot of weapons and equipment, and the wildlings' weapons are becoming stronger and stronger. The few regular troops were full of anger, but they couldn't use their strength, because the enemy didn't even set up their formation to fight them head on. Sometimes, the regular troops were ambushed by the wildlings, and when other friendly troops arrived, these soldiers had already died tragically. Their armor and clothes were stripped off, leaving only naked bodies lying on the ground in the wind and snow. The wildlings got another wave of equipment, which increased their strength a little, and then left. Before these news reached Viserys, they had already spread throughout the 7 kingdoms. The nobles of the 7 kingdoms, who had not taken it seriously before, all understood that the situation was difficult. However, what was unexpected was that they did not immediately send more troops to support King Robert in suppressing the wildlings. Instead, they quickly sent troops to block the main entrances to the territory, prevent these fleeing wildlings from entering their own territories to cause damage and cause property losses. But later, they felt that it was really embarrassing and unworthy to do so. The king was still fighting on the front line, while they were cowering in the rear, and the Prime Minister Jonarin, who stayed in King's Landing, issued many conscription orders in succession. He asked the knights and soldiers of the 7 kingdoms to obey the king's call, march to the north, clear the inbound wildlings, and fight against the possible appearance of the White Walkers. So the young Duke Renly Baratheon of Stormland took the lead in supporting his brother, but he did not go out in person, but entrusted another earl to lead the army of Baratheon's hometown to the north. Then the Westerlands responded second. The shrewd Duke Tywin Lannister was also a famous commander in the 7 kingdoms, but he also stayed in Casterly Rock to preside over the overall situation, and sent other earls in the Westerlands to lead troops to reinforce the king. Next came the king's new in-laws. Although the wildlings and the White Walkers may not be able to threaten the river reach far to the south. Moreover, the Tyrell family of Highgarden was not good at war, but at this juncture, other nobles expressed their opinions one after another, and he had to express his attitude. It was just a little reluctant. As for the Vale, needless to say, they did not need to express their opinions. Although Jonarin's control over the Vale was declining due to his absence from the Vale for many years, the prestige of the Arryn family was still there, and the Knights of the Vale were already on their way to the north. This time, the major families of the 7 kingdoms were serious, and sent a large number of troops, with a total of 60,000 troops in one place. Even Dorne did not continue to slack off this time, but sent out several thousand people. Because although Dorne and Targaryen have formed an alliance, and the threat of the White Walkers is far away, after all, they are on the same land, and things are afraid of the worst. This army of more than 60,000 people, of which 5,500 are knights, officially broke the record of the largest army in Westeros when Egon conquered Westeros about 300 years ago. At that time, King Loren Lannister of the Rock and King Mon IX of the Reach joined forces in the Golden Tree City to resist Aegon Targaryen. Now, the Seven Kingdoms, with some reservations, have joined forces with a total of 60,000 troops to form a human alliance to resist the invasion of the White Walkers and marched straight to Winterfell. It took a long time for the human alliance to form in March. Because of the sea, the transmission of intelligence was seriously delayed. By the time this intelligence fell into Viserys' hands, it was already the end of September. There was no golden autumn in September in Pentos, but the cold wind was getting colder and colder. The changing seasons every few years made Viserys feel a little uncomfortable at first, but the residents living here did not have any discomfort, as if it was natural. Viserys did not know whether such a long rotation of seasons was caused by special astronomical and geographical influences, or by the legendary battle between the unreachable gods. At this moment, he was standing on the high tower of the palace wearing a plush white cloak, looking out at the endless sea. His coming-of-age ceremony was being prepared intensively. After today, he would be an adult in this world. Chapter 288 Coming-of-Age Ceremony. The next morning, Viserys woke up in a lively atmosphere. All the servants in the palace were busy setting up and rehearsing. The king's coming-of-age ceremony must be a grand ceremony. Some people who stayed in Andalus also rushed over from there. Rhaenys personally rode the dragon back to Andalus to pick up her aunt. Fortunately, Rhaegal's memory was better than Rhaenys's, and the dragon still knew the way, so Rhaenys didn't get lost. And I don't know if he understood Daenerys' words, or because he was lonely and bored. Viserion also flew over. With the growth of age and body, Balerion and Rhaegal both had the ability to fight, so they left Andalus and came to the battlefield to fight. In the entire royal forest, only the white dragon Viserion was left behind. Without his brothers to play with, and the little guys around were too small, Viserion also felt a little boring. Then Viserion flew to their new home with Rhaegal and his companion Daenerys. The morning sun shone in the garden, and the servants were carrying ladders to hang brocade on the wall. Rhaenys and Daenerys came to his side, which greatly relieved Viserys' bad mood due to the recent events in Myr and Westeros. A gentle smile appeared on his face again. Dany. Viserys was wearing a soft velvet robe with gorgeous golden patterns embroidered on it, and a dragon head medal reflecting metallic light was pinned on his chest. The young man with long silver gold hair also wore a golden crown on his head. As soon as he appeared, he attracted the attention of all the girls present. Even some middle-aged noble ladies couldn't help but roll their throats together, feeling a little itchy on their bodies, and had an urge to hug this beautiful boy and ravage him hard. Viserys' appearance is too high, especially after his physique broke through the extraordinary. The long silver gold hair shone in the sun, almost covering the golden crown on his head. His skin also became extremely textured, white, and smooth, and even ordinary swords could not pierce his skin without a little effort. The young man's handsome face was originally a little serious. However, when he saw the two girls standing in the front row of the crowd on both sides, he couldn't help but reveal a gentle smile on his face. "Brother." Then Daenerys ran towards him and gave Viserys a big hug. And Viserys also hugged his sister, and at the same time, reached out and gently rubbed Daenerys, who also had silver hair. Daenerys' personality is very clingy, and she is unwilling to let go after hugging Viserys. And after not seeing her for such a long time, Viserys also found that the girl's personality has changed a little. Before the coming-of-age ceremony began, Daenerys chatted non-stop, and Viserys also listened patiently to the girl talking about some trivial things in the castle. Just as the old maid said to Viserys, Rhaenys has become more sensible, and Daenerys may be about to reach puberty. Not only has she grown taller, her figure has also begun to show its slender corners, and her personality has become much more lively. She is no longer shy and afraid to speak, because of many trivial things. Both girls have changed for the better, and Viserys is naturally very happy. "Good day, uncle." On the other side, little Aegon, seeing the family gathered together, also couldn't help but come forward to greet everyone. And Aunt Daenerys. Although little Aegon is about the same age as Daenerys, he still has to call her aunt. Viserys patted little Egan on the shoulder. Daenerys seemed a little restrained and unfamiliar with Egan's appearance, but she also greeted him politely. Before coming here from Andalus, Daenerys heard about such a person. It is said that he is the son of her eldest brother Rhaegar Targaryen, whom she has never met. However, Daenerys also heard some rumors that the other party was not actually a dragon, but a fake. The existence of Egan has always been questioned within the Targaryen family, because it is indeed impossible to confirm whether the other party is the real Prince Egan. After all, this is just one-sided words of some people, unless other evidence can be found. "Hello, Egan." Daenerys responded to Egan politely. "Done." Then, with the melodious bells of the palace ringing, His Majesty's coming-of-age ceremony officially began. The 40 families of Pentos who escaped the purge of the Bloody Night and the local wealthy businessmen. The new nobles of the Targaryen dynasty, Earl Geoffrey who stayed in Andalus, and William Derry, the former coach of the Red Castle, also came to the scene. The old lord was the earl who was canonized by Viserys. He was granted a prosperous town closest to Andalus, and built a small castle. It's just a pity that Geoffrey never got married in his life, and he didn't leave any offspring, so no one could inherit his castle. In fact, Viserys had accidentally heard that when the old knight was about the same age as he is now, that is, when he was 16 years old, it seems that a bastard who was later legalized was left in Westeros and was raised by his younger brother and inherited his surname. Because he killed a noble enemy in the street, he was tried by the king and was forced to flee Westeros and came to Essos to become a mercenary sailor. Later, by chance, he met Prince Rhaegar. Only then was he able to return to Westeros, but he still kept his name and did not restore his surname. In the end, he survived to the position of commander-in-chief of the Dragonstone fleet, and because of Rhaegar's appreciation, he has always been loyal to the Targaryen family. The old knight was unwilling to talk about his sad past, and Viserys naturally could not ask. The matter was left unresolved. The old earl is still full of white hair. Although he is very old, his figure is still upright and majestic. He can even wear armor and go into battle in person with bright eyes. However, the old injury did have some impact on him. Although he looked strong on the surface, if you look closely, you can find that his face is not as radiant as before. He is very energetic, but his body is not as good as before. The old earl wore the golden medal of the king's hand on his chest and was at the head of the crowd in the hall. The two princesses of the new dynasty, Rhaenys and Daenerys, stood behind Earl Geoffrey, Aberyn, Bessie Joyce, John Clinton, Prince Tattered, and other nobles of the new dynasty. It was difficult to even see each other in normal times, but now they were all gathered together. Chapter 289 Blonde Baby Boy. Done. Then the melodious sound of bells spread throughout Pentos again. Envoys from various trading cities came forward one after another, handing over their gift lists and letters of congratulation. Then Viserys led the nobles of the new dynasty and the envoys of various parties to patrol the entire city of Pentos. However, Viserys did not ride on the ostentatious ivory and gold throne, but rode his own warhorse to get closer to the people. The handsome young man with silver hair was wearing a gorgeous brocade robe, his long hair fluttering in the wind, with a golden crown on his head, and he looked heroic. And 3 giant dragons were also flying above his head, which was extremely domineering. All the nobles and envoys of the new dynasty present also followed him obediently in gorgeous costumes. The long team drove out of the Nine Towers Palace and patrolled the city of Pentos. Don't push. Hey. Go back. On both sides, Targaryen soldiers were maintaining order and isolating the citizens of Pentos who were watching around. The citizens of Pentos were enthusiastic. They crowded in the front to watch their legendary real Dragon King, the savior who saved Pentos and smashed the governor's family's monopoly and exploited the people's blood and sweat. When they saw Viserys riding a warhorse past them, the people who were blocked by the soldiers cheered and even rushed forward in waves. The weather in Pentos was good today. The sky was clear, cloudless, and the weather was sunny and there was no biting cold wind. The people kept crowding forward, cheering, and waving to Viserys. And Viserys also grabbed the reins of the warhorse with one hand, waved to the people, and a smile appeared on his calm face. It is indeed a proud thing to be supported by the people. He didn't do much. First, He liberated the monopoly, prices fell, and people's income increased, which means he gave money. Second, he won a victory, and the people were satisfied spiritually, so they could hold their chests high and speak loudly to foreign merchants. This exiled Targaryen king is very popular in Pentos. Following the convoy behind, the envoy of Lord Toroshi looked at Viserys' popularity among the people of Pentos and said with some worry. On the other side, the city councillor of Bravos shook his head slightly after hearing the words of the Toroshi envoy. His Majesty Viserys III is much more popular in Andalus than here. In Andalus, Viserys is almost a demigod, and the people support him more because he is deified and has created miracles. In Pentos, Viserys led Pentos to victory and ended the monopoly of the governor's family. Naturally, his reputation is very high now. The national sentiment of the people of Pentos is also at a high point. After all, Pentos has been a humiliating history for nearly 100 years. However, the people of Pentos are happy, but the surrounding neighbors are worried. A dictator who is supported by the people will unite a stronger force. If this king is warlike, it will not be a good thing for the neighbors. Looking at Viserys' growth history, although this exiled Targaryen king cannot be called a tyrant, he is at least an active warmonger. Under Targaryen's rule, there was almost no year without war, and he continued to expand his territory. And many interesting things happened during Viserys' inspection of Pentos. For example, a group of orphans begged loudly, and the frightened warhorse crashed into the fruit stall. A certain knight's warhorse was in heat, and he ignored the owner's obstruction, and came to the other side of the horse to flirt with each other. There was also a mistress abandoned by an unknown noble, holding an illegitimate child. He stopped the team on the street to file a complaint, saying that his employer owed him wages and did not pay them, etc. After a lot of trouble, Viserys' tour of the city was quite successful, and he led the team back to the palace. The next step was a grand dinner, and according to the plan, there was a tournament to celebrate the king's coming of age ceremony on the second day. A group of knights who wanted to gain honor and make a name for themselves through this opportunity were naturally ready to go. Viserys was very interested, but he naturally didn't need to add Lister to his name with a tournament champion. Otherwise, if he wanted to go, the tournament champion would be at his fingertips. You know, the mountain Gregor Clegane, who was known as the most evil man in the Seven Kingdoms, was still imprisoned in a water dungeon with his 5 limbs broken. He couldn't live or die. This happened not long ago. A baron forced him to admit his crimes and wrote a confession. He accused the usurper Robert Baratheon and the Lord of Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister, the Westerly Guardian, of being murderers. As for the details of the attack on the Red Castle that year, Gregor Clegane himself couldn't explain it clearly. He just said that he did take a golden-haired baby boy from Princess Elia Martell's arms and then smashed it against the wall, breaking his head and bleeding. Golden-haired baby boy. A baron pried out such an important piece of information from the mountain. However, the mountain himself did not remember it very clearly. After all, it was a long time ago. Then a baron told Viserys about it. Blonde hair? How is that possible? Viserys was also a little stunned, and then tried to recall the color of Aegon's hair when he was just a baby. However, Viserys traveled through time a few days before the fall of King's Landing, and he did not remember Aegon's hair color very clearly. The baby boy's hair was very short, only a little bit. Viserys was confused when he just traveled through time and did not observe carefully. Now thinking about it carefully, it is a little difficult to confirm. He remembered. It should be silver. But fortunately, there is another important person who can confirm it. That is the old maid of the Targaryen family. Sophia used to follow Viserys' mother Queen Rhaella, and she must remember what color Aegon's hair was. This matter is very important. If Aegon's hair is not golden, then it means that the baby boy who fell to death on the wall at that time may not be the real Aegon. Then, Viserys sent another letter to Andalus, but Sophia replied by denying that Aegon had golden hair. Aegon looks like a Targaryen, but his hair is not golden. How can a boy with golden hair be born if neither the prince nor the princess has golden hair? But Sophia still explained this in her reply. Aegon's hair may indeed look a little yellow in the dim room with only candlelight. Sophia had taken care of Aegon for a long time, so she naturally knew it very well. Egan's hair was a little yellow, and it looked a little like gold, but it was not completely golden. It was still silver in the bright sunlight. This may be related to Egan's mother Elia. Elia's health was very unstable. When she gave birth to Renus, she was bedridden for half a year. When she gave birth to Egan, she almost lost her life, and was diagnosed by the Meester that she would never have children again. Elia's physical problem caused Egan to have a little congenital malnutrition when he was young, which caused his hair to be a little dry and yellow. The mountain killed Elia and her child in a room lit only by candlelight. When Tywin finally wrapped the child's body in a red robe and presented it to Robert, it was outdoors in full sunlight. Chapter 290, Capture Alive. Across the narrow sea, Viserys, the second prince of the former Targaryen dynasty who fled and was the offspring of the evil dragon that Robert hated the most, was holding his coming-of-age ceremony. A living adult male Targaryen heir was enough to pose a huge challenge to the Baratheon dynasty. Even if he had nothing, Robert wanted to find a killer to kill him. However, the heir of the Targaryen family is not without everything now. Viserys has a large army and a vast territory. He has territories comparable to the two dukes in Westeros except the north. He has a large population base, 2 main cities, and the wealthy Pentus, eyeing the Iron Throne. The pressure he has given has almost spread across the narrow sea to the 7 kingdoms. Almost everyone knows that a war will break out between the new king and the old king sooner or later. The Baratheon dynasty is actually not very popular. The reason why it can still sit firmly on the throne today is mainly because many nobles in the 7 kingdoms have offended the Targaryen family to death, and there is no room for turning back. The 4 families of Wolf, Deer, Fish and Eagle occupied half of the 7 kingdoms. These people were the main force of the rebellion and were naturally unforgivable. Many families surrendered upon hearing the news and even stabbed Targaryen in the back. The representative of them was the Lannister family. Many unpleasant things happened later. If Viserys one day crossed the narrow sea and regained the Iron Throne, the Lannister family would inevitably be liquidated. At that time, they could think about where to escape on the boat. However, now Robert Baratheon has no time to take care of the intelligence on the other side of the narrow sea. He is now a little overwhelmed by the chaos in front of him. The situation in the north is actually a bit special, mainly because it is vast and sparsely populated. The north is vast, almost equivalent to the total area of the other 6 kingdoms, but despite the vast territory of the north, the population is extremely sparse, and it is not comparable to the rich south. There are large tracts of wasteland, forests and snow-capped mountains in the north. This vast and sparsely populated terrain is very suitable for the wildlings' tactics of shooting and running. In addition, the wildlings are extremely capable of surviving in the wild. Once they go into the mountains or forests, the regular army will not be able to find them. If they go deep into the forest, they will easily be ambushed. And now they don't have enough soldiers on hand. Most of them were crushed to death when the Great Wall collapsed, and others were killed by the wildlings in the chaos that night. Soldiers can't find their generals, and generals can't find their soldiers. After all, who would have thought that such a big Great Wall would suddenly collapse? The 2 commanders, Robert and Eddard Stark, were in Mole Village that night. Robert was drunk and was naked hugging an equally naked woman for fun, and Lord Eddard rushed back to find their unreliable king at night. However, at this time, they suddenly received the news of the collapse of the Great Wall, and the 2 looked at each other. Then Robert woke up from the wine and hurriedly followed Eddard back to Winterfell, gathering the defeated remnants along the way. However, people will not always be unlucky. Boys who love to laugh will not have bad luck. Robert, a big boy who loves to laugh, has always had good luck. Robert once escaped John Connington's pursuit by crawling under women's skirts. This time, they found the location of Mans Raider, the king beyond the wall. Stannis did not die on the night when the wall collapsed, but he was really frightened. His bald head was smashed by a stone, and then he broke through the siege and escaped from the Black Castle under the desperate protection of the guards. Afterwards, Stannis did not return to Winterfell, but led his guards to wander around in the forest. They were panicked and fled into the dense forest and could not find the way back. However, at this moment, Stannis led a few remaining guards to find the traces of Mans Raider, the king beyond the wall. Mance Rayder seemed to be hiding in this dense forest, secretly commanding the wildlings to cause destruction. After discovering this, Stannis quietly left and then spent a long time finding the way back. However, Stannis still did not return to Winterfell at this time. Instead, he led his guards to continue wandering and collected some soldiers who had fled in the Battle of Castle Black. Then he led these defeated soldiers back to the dense forest. The Duke of Dragonstone still had bandages on his head, and his whole body was already in tatters, and he still exuded a strong smell of sourness. However, he was as tenacious as a stone. Stannis drew his sword, bravely led the soldiers to charge, and personally rushed to the front. He killed into the wild tribe hiding in the dense forest, and after a fierce battle, he personally captured Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall. Mance Rayder had just been captured, and at first he was very calm and wanted to conceal his identity, but he was exposed by a slip of the tongue by another simple-minded subordinate. Mance Rayder was actually really unlucky. The plan he proposed to break up into smaller units and wreak havoc everywhere involved the regular army running around, and in order to reduce the target and prevent the army of the Seven Kingdoms from targeting him, he only left more than 300 wildlings around him. However, Mance Rayder never expected that hundreds of thousands of wildlings would run around the north, and even those with quick legs and feet were about to escape from the north and enter the Riverlands. But he was unlucky enough to be targeted and captured by Stannis. Stannis actually didn't know Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall. At that time, he was lying in the snow, but through some clues and calm inference, he guessed that this might be the foothold of the king beyond the wall. And if he didn't kill these people, he wouldn't suffer any loss, and it would be considered to have recovered the losses of the defeat. So Stannis ran out to gather some remnants of the defeated army, and then boldly came back to kill again. After a fierce fight between the two sides in the dense forest, there were only a dozen soldiers left on Stannis' side. Although the wildlings resisted very tenaciously, they were either killed or captured alive. Mance Rayder saw that the war was not going well, and he could not escape, so he surrendered very quickly. He was disguised very well when he was captured. He disguised himself like an ordinary wildling tribe leader and even took the initiative to express his willingness to surrender to the regular army and help them to encircle and suppress other wildlings. Stannis was also fooled by Mance Rayder's exquisite acting skills at first. He also thought that he did not catch the real king beyond the wall and felt a little disappointed. However, since he did not catch the king beyond the wall, but caught a guide, he did not suffer any loss. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291 Burned to Death. However, at this time, another captured wildling next to Mance Rayder made a mistake in answering questions. This made the meticulous Stannis keenly aware of the other party's true identity. He then confirmed that the tribal leader who looked honest, kowtowed and begged for mercy, and expressed his willingness to lead the regular army to wipe out the wildlings was Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall. Then Stannis did not give Mance Rayder the opportunity to continue to quibble. He led the remaining dozen soldiers to escort the king beyond the wall and rushed to Winterfell to reunite with his eldest brother. Stannis' return to Winterfell naturally caused a sensation. His eldest brother Robert personally went out of the city to greet him and hugged him tightly with tears in his eyes. Although the two brothers were not in harmony and often quarreled, they were brothers born by their parents after all. And Stannis, who was as smelly and hard as a stone in the toilet, also had slightly red eyes. Everyone in Winterfell thought that Stannis had died long ago. And then Stannis then pulled out Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, and told everyone his identity. At first, Eddard Stark and his elder brother Robert could not believe that the man in front of them was the king beyond the wall. However, after repeated confirmation, the other party's identity was finally confirmed. Mance Rayder was once a wildling orphan raised by the Night's Watch. He grew up and served in the Night's Watch for many years. He then defected from the Night's Watch and returned to the wildlings. He eventually united all the wildlings, quelled their disputes, and was elected as the king beyond the wall. Therefore, some veterans in the Night's Watch were still able to recognize him, such as Mr. Riemann, the living fossil of the Night's Watch. The old Mr. was not killed when the wall collapsed. He had a high prestige in the Night's Watch, so he was protected by many soldiers at the risk of their lives. In the end, he was escorted to Winterfell, and so was Jim Ormond, the commander-in-chief of the Night's Watch. When Robert finally confirmed that the other party was really the legendary king beyond the wall, he was overjoyed. You should know that the current chaos in the north is all because of this man. If he hadn't blown the horn of winter, the wall would not have collapsed, and the wildlings would not have flooded into the north. However, at this time, including Robert, Eddard Stark, Stannis, Jon Royce of the Vale, and other self-proclaimed righteous people have selectively forgotten that the wildlings had taken the initiative to negotiate several times. The wildlings constantly lowered their conditions and begged the kings of the Seven Kingdoms to open the gates and let the wildlings come to the wall to avoid the pursuit of the White Walkers. However, they were all arrogantly rejected by Robert. Robert didn't believe that the wildlings had weapons that could destroy the walls, so he regarded the words of the wildling messengers as farts. Eventually, the current situation was caused. The wildlings were forced to blow the horn of winter to collapse the wall in order to survive. Then they fled into the north and caused destruction everywhere. They believed that these were all the results of the arrogance of the people behind the wall, so they had to retaliate several times. Now the real king beyond the wall was tied up and brought to Winterfell. Robert was naturally overjoyed to see the captured king beyond the wall alive, and immediately asked Mance Rayder to order all the wildlings to surrender, otherwise he would be burned alive. Robert was now also enraged by the wildlings. He had been king for so many years and had never been so wronged. Moreover, his character had changed completely from the black-haired young man he used to be. Eddard Stark wanted to dissuade Robert. He believed that the king beyond the wall was a man of decent status after all, and no one should be subjected to cruel punishments based on torture. The king beyond the wall could be sent to the gallows, or beheaded for a capital crime, and burning the other party alive was undoubtedly a replica of the behavior of the tyrant Mad King Aerys II. However, at this moment, Mance Rayder, who had been silent since his identity was revealed, suddenly mocked Robert. He mocked that they would all die at the hands of the White Walkers, and that the Iron Throne would eventually be taken by the Targaryen king across the Narrow Sea. Although Mance Rayder has been living outside the wall, he is surprisingly familiar with the situation in the Seven Kingdoms. And Mance Rayder also told Robert that he would not order the wildlings to surrender, because he had told all the wildlings a long time ago that he was not the king beyond the wall and did not want to be a king. He just united everyone to overcome difficulties. They are all free people. No one can make them kneel. Mance Rayder even spit on Robert's face with an expression of wanting to die. And Robert was indeed angered by Mance Rayder's attitude and wanted to burn him alive. Eddard Stark and Stannis saw that Mance Rayder wanted to deliberately anger Robert and seek the idea of a quick death. So they hurried to stop the king, but it was impossible to stop him. The furious Robert immediately asked the soldiers to build a stake with dry grass piled under it, and then tied Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, to the pillar. Holding a blazing torch in his hand, he asked the other party if he was willing to kneel down and surrender. However, he was still ridiculed by Mance Rayder. In the end, Robert threw the torch into the dry grass in anger, and a fire burned in an instant. Mance Rayder was still calm in the flames, and his eyes, that seemed to want to eat people, glared at everyone around him. For his people, he was willing to die calmly, because Mance Rayder knew very well that he had fallen into the hands of the king of the Seven Kingdoms. The other party would definitely make a fuss about him to deceive other free people, to lay down their weapons or surround and attack. He didn't want to cause more free people to die because of himself, so Mance Rayder deliberately wanted to provoke Robert to seek a quick death. His plan succeeded. Robert Baratheon was indeed an irritable person. He hated this king beyond the wall, and it was a great favor to give him a chance to live. After being rudely rejected, he directly asked to burn him to death. However, Mance Rayder underestimated the pain of being burned alive. Originally, this wild man remained calm and even glared. However, when the flames burned his skin, the moisture in his body evaporated quickly, his skin slowly shrank and turned yellow, and his flesh and blood flowed out. His face changed. The expression on Mance Raider's face gradually became distorted, and a painful groan squeezed out from between his teeth. In the end, this pain continued to magnify, and he could no longer bear it, and he let out a shrill scream. His whole body was wrapped in flames, his mouth opened wide, and flames kept coming out of his eyes and mouth. The twisted and shrill screams continued to echo over the entire Winterfell. The three little ones of the Stark family stood in the corridor on the second floor of the castle, and looked at the blazing flames below. Robb Stark looked serious and meticulous, and Jon Snow showed reluctance. The red-haired beauty Sansa was directly scared and cried. She had never seen such a terrible scene. The father who used to be fair and just stood behind Uncle Robert and watched a man being burned to death without saying a word. Chapter 292 Absorbing and Giving. Far away in Pentos. Time passed quickly. More than a month had passed since Viserys' coming-of-age ceremony. From the capture of the city on New Year's Eve in the year 291 of the Egan calendar to now, many things had happened, and another year had almost passed. The morning sun shone through the windowsill and sprinkled into the elegant bedroom. Irian was still sleeping soundly under the golden curtains. Last night, there was another love-making, and Irian, who was in good physical condition, could not withstand such tossing. Viserys still got up on time as usual. He rarely slept in. The silver-haired young man was sitting on the bed with his upper body naked and putting on clothes. The main reason was that once he woke up, he could not fall asleep again. Viserys had many things in his mind. Although he was in a high position like the king and had a commanding position, he was under much more pressure than a farmer, and he had many things to consider. Every morning, even if he wanted to be lazy for a while, he could not fall asleep again when he thought of the things in his mind. At this time, some tiny sounds came to his ears. A black cat walked out of the windowsill with nimble steps and appeared in Viserys' eyes. It was Balerion, the little black cat that Rhaenys brought out of the Red Castle. However, the little black cat was still a cute little kitten at that time. Now so many years have passed, and Viserys has held his coming-of-age ceremony. Balerion has naturally grown from a little kitten to an old black cat. Its body has become a lot fatter, and it walks a little wobbly, but its balance is still good, and it can move freely on the narrow windowsill. It is mainly because the food in the castle and the palace is good, and it lives a life of luxury every day, and its head is still the same little head as before, which looks a little inconsistent with its fat body. It turned its little head slightly left and right, and didn't notice anyone looking at it. Then it lazily collapsed on the windowsill, not afraid of falling down. At the same time, its round body stretched slightly and stretched. However, the old black cat had just laid down for a short time when it discovered that the owner of this room had woken up and was sitting by the bed, looking at itself. Then the black cat licked its paws and made a soft meow, with no intention of leaving. In the Nine Towers Palace, there was no one else who dared to occupy Viserys' room except the old fat cat. When Balerion was in Andalosburg, he was the bully in the castle. After coming to the Nine Towers Palace, he seamlessly became the overlord here again. Several wild cats that once lived in the palace were scratched on their faces after Balerion came, and they were beaten up and fled here in the end. Balerion was satisfied and walked back with an elegant step to continue sleeping. Viserys looked at the big fat cat lying on his balcony like this and shook his head slightly without leaving, and then retracted his gaze. I don't know if it's because of the same name as the Black Dragon. Under the influence of his younger brother, Big Balerion has indeed become much braver. In order to distinguish the cat and the dragon, Viserys called them Big Balerion and Little Balerion respectively when they were present at the same time. The old black cat is much older than the Black Dragon and was even forced to work to help Rhaenys hatch dragon eggs. It is naturally Big Balerion. The Black Dragon is just a child, although it has grown a little bigger. Although the big fat cat looks small, it is doing well in the dragon circle. When the three dragons were young, the big fat cat often looked for them to play and even lay on their backs. Later, it disappeared in the castle for a few days for no reason. It turned out that it ran to the royal forest to play with the big children. Since the two Balerions became good friends, Big Balerion has become much braver and his body size has also increased. Rhaenys once disliked him very much. She suspected that Balerion had gone to the royal forest to find his dragon brother for a snack. The dragons were also very friendly to the big fat cats, often catching some game and roasting it for the big cats. She ignored the fact that a big fat cat occupied her balcony. Viserys retracted his gaze, fastened the last button, put on all his clothes, and came to the silver mirror in the bedroom. This is a silver-plated bronze mirror made by hand from me, which is worth a lot of money. However, since me was destroyed by the Dothraki, such exquisite craftsmanship made by masters has become less and less common. Viserys stood in front of the mirror and stared at himself. Then the black mist gradually spread in his eyes, filling the whole room, and Viserys' figure was wrapped in the black mist. After the accumulation of the previous period of time, the amount of black mist he has accumulated can now support him to add points again. It is still presented in the ancient High Valyrian language. Water, fire, earth and moon are used to represent the corresponding abilities. This time, Viserys raised his strength to the extraordinary realm in one go, and at the same time, he raised his most proud spiritual ability again, reaching nearly 30. Every attribute of ordinary people fluctuates around 10, while special people such as the Mountain have very terrifying strength and physique. With the blessing of magic ability, Viserys' hand strength at that time was not even as strong as his, but the Mountain still did not reach the extraordinary ability. Now that Viserys has broken through to the extraordinary, in addition to a significant increase in strength, he has naturally awakened a new ability. That is the ability to freely absorb and give black mist. Absorb and give? Viserys stood in place and savored the ability he could understand. Now he stood in front of the silver mirror, with one hand slightly raised to form a claw shape. He didn't know if others could see it, but now a ball of black mist appeared in his palm. Viserys had a hunch in his heart that, if this black mist was given to other people, it might produce unexpected special abilities. For example, helping the other party improve their strength. Such thoughts flashed through Viserys' mind. However, without any experimentation, he was not sure about the specific effects of this ability. As for absorbing and giving is to give the black mist to other people, while absorbing is, as the name implies, to take the black mist away from other people. Viserys had previously speculated that the black mist might be spiritual energy in the human body, similar to the soul. Therefore, after he killed a person with his own hands, he would take away the soul in the person's body, and the person would die completely. Chapter 293 Infusion of Black Mist. This absorption ability is like killing. As long as he grabs the wrist or touches the body, he can directly extract the opponent's soul from the body. In other words, the opponent is killed in seconds. However, the same problem remains. Without experiments, Viserys does not know whether this ability is effective for non-humans, such as dragons or White Walkers. If it is, wouldn't he be able to become a hero of mankind and kill the Night King with one blow after getting close to him? Of course, he is just thinking about it now. What kind of existence is a Night King? It is still unclear whether he has a soul. He has no ideal of saving the world, and he has no idea and ability to fight the army of the dead. Now the time is not right, and he does not want to fly to the other side of the narrow sea and confront the Night King's army head on. The ability to absorb the black mist is to kill, and giving the black mist the ability should be very interesting. Viserys stood in front of the silver mirror and whispered to himself, "But I still have to find something to test it. Who should I find?" The silver-haired young man thought for a moment, glanced at Tyrion who had not yet woken up, and then his eyes fell on the big fat cat that was basking in the sun and licking its paws. Big Valyrian was stretching in the sun, looking relaxed. However, at this moment, he seemed to suddenly feel Viserys' malicious gaze, and his expression froze slightly. Although he didn't know what was going to happen, he instinctively had a bad premonition. The fat black cat struggled to get up from the ground, as if he wanted to sneak away, but at this moment he found that the silver-haired young man who had just stood in the house had disappeared. The black cat was slightly stunned. It thought it had seen a ghost in broad daylight. How could a two-legged beast disappear? Then it felt a pair of big hands hugging its belly from behind, and picked it up. Meow. Valyrian's limbs moved around, struggling to escape. However, Viserys held the black cat in his arms and combed its hair slightly. With a calm smile on his face, he persuaded in a gentle voice, as if he was coaxing a child. "It's okay, Valyrian. It won't hurt." Then the smile on the silver-haired young man's face slightly restrained, and his palm pressed on the top of the black cat's head. Change for me. The next second, Billy Ryan's body suddenly stiffened slightly, and his pair of dark green eyes flashed with brilliance. The fierce struggle just now also stopped, and he looked much more docile. He hummed twice, and lay quietly in Viserys' arms. At this time, no one could see what happened, but Viserys himself knew that he had injected a ball of black mist into the black cat's body. The quality of this black mist was not very high, only the size of a person's soul. After the black mist entered Billy Ryan's body, the black cat became quiet. Viserys held the black cat in one hand and placed the other hand on its head. His pair of lavender eyes stared at Billy Ryan's changes. He didn't want to hurt the black cat, so he was ready to interrupt the black mist at any time if there was any bad change. However, he was sure that the existence of the black mist would only benefit the black cat and not harm it. The only worry was whether the black cat could withstand this power. Therefore, Viserys carefully controlled the injection of the black mist. But now it seems that everything is going well. Billy Ryan instantly calmed down and seemed to be enjoying the process. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the light in his vertical pupils seemed to be brighter than before. Then the black mist was completely injected into Billy Ryan's body, and Viserys slowly withdrew his hand. It's over. The big fat cat didn't seem to have any changes, but he was a little dissatisfied with Viserys' sudden stop. He stood up and shook his hair slightly, and then made a cat cry. Then he took light steps, jumped onto the windowsill easily, and ran away with his tail shaking. It seemed as if nothing had happened. Viserys stood in front of the windowsill, watching Billy Ryan's back as he went away, holding his chin with his hand, and slightly lost in thought. No reaction? Although Viserys was sure that the black mist was only good for the black cat, he had also thought of several possible situations. Even the black cat turned into a Super Saiyan with all its hair standing up, and then gave him an uppercut. But he had never thought that the black cat had no reaction at all, as if nothing had happened. No matter what, there should be some reaction, right? What is the reason? Viserys touched his chin and was puzzled. The black cat had already run far away at this moment, and he did not chase after it to catch it back. Does the black mist have different effects for other people? However, when Viserys was lost in thought, the Dornish girl sleeping on the soft big bed beside him finally woke up. Ah. It's so comfortable. Irian stretched slightly and yawned. Then she saw Viserys standing alone on the balcony, and his body seemed to be shrouded in a thin layer of black mist. Irian was stunned for a moment, and then suddenly woke up. She rubbed her sleepy eyes, confirmed that she was not seeing things, and then couldn't help but speak. My love. Irian suddenly spoke, awakening Viserys, who was deep in thought. After hearing what Irian said, Viserys raised his eyebrows slightly. You saw the black mist on me? This was unexpected for him. Ever since Viserys awakened the ability to absorb the black mist when he first came to this world, he found that no one else could see this black mist except himself. However, he did not expect that when his power broke through the extraordinary, his whole body felt like it was burned by fire, and then he gained the ability to control the black mist. The black mist can be taken and given freely, and now it can be seen by Irian with the naked eye. What's going on? Are these abilities brought by the extraordinary power, or are they special, because Viserys' 4 attributes are all out of mortals? Viserys thought for a moment, and he was more inclined to the latter, because he had guessed before that when all abilities reach the extraordinary level, there will be a qualitative change. Those below 20 points are all mortals, and those who reach 20 points have reached the extraordinary level. As for reaching 30 points, there will definitely be more terrifying changes, another qualitative leap. Viserys had guessed this before, so when all his abilities reached transcendence, he added the remaining black mist to his highest attribute, the moon-like mental power. He was looking forward to what changes would occur when his mental power reached a higher level again. Chapter 294, Exploring the Ruins of Illyria. My love. Irian sat on the bed naked, watching Viserys lost in thought, and couldn't help but ask with a little worry, what is that black fog? Or, am I seeing things? Irian suspected that she was a little dazzled after waking up. Viserys was interrupted by Irian. He raised his head and looked into her eyes seriously after hearing his fiancé's words, and said with a serious expression, Of course it's some kind of divine power. Divine power. Irian was slightly stunned when she heard Viserys' words and blinked her deep and beautiful eyes. Of course. Viserys nodded as a matter of course. You know, Irian, I have been blessed by the gods. People have always linked Viserys with a certain god, mainly because the story of an 8-year-old wandering prince's struggle is too magical and hard to believe, and the title of genius and wise king does not seem to be enough to express this exaggeration, so he was linked with the gods. What? Irian opened her mouth wider when she heard Viserys' words, and Viserys was a little eager to do something. Seeing Irian's shocked face, as if she was about to believe it, Viserys put away his serious expression on his face, smiled and shook his head. Okay, I lied to you, Irian. The silver-haired young man smiled calmly. His smile was as warm as the spring breeze, and he gently rubbed his fiance's cheek. It's not divine power. Then he saw Irian slap his palm away in shame and anger. This annoying guy. He teased her again. Then Viserys told Irian a few more words, asking her not to stay in bed and get up early, then put on his coat and walked out of the room. Irian watched Viserys leave the room, and the shame on her face slowly subsided, and her eyes sparkled. Black mist. The Dornish girl sat on the bed with her upper body naked. She looked at the door that closed after Viserys left, and she didn't care about exposing her heavy chest. A puzzled expression appeared on her pretty face full of exotic charm, and her brows were slightly furrowed. She didn't understand what Viserys said just now. And, divine power. When Viserys started talking about divine power, Irian was really frightened. She really thought that Viserys had mastered some extraordinary ability, because in her opinion, Viserys' ability to control dragons was already a kind of divine power. However, Viserys' words made her unpredictable, and she didn't understand what he was talking about. Did I really see it wrong? Then, Irian thought for a moment. Then she called out to the personal maid she brought from Dawn, and asked her to call her trusted Sand Snake sisters over. The war was over, and Viserys' coming-of-age ceremony was over. The father of the Sand Snake sisters, Prince Oberyn, was about to lead the army back to the Barren Mountain camp. These days, the Sand Snake sisters have been accompanying their father and adoptive mother, and have not come to Irian for several days. They are all Irian's maternal family. As the eldest sister of the Sand Snakes, Irian trusted them very much, so she would choose to consult them when she had any problems. In the corridor of the palace, the footsteps were clear. Your Majesty. A servant saw Viserys, and quickly made way and bowed. Viserys was followed by 2 guards. He was wearing a soft robe, a golden belt, and his long silver gold hair was hanging freely. The smile on his face just now also restrained a little. He did not choose to hide Irian's question. He just answered it in a general way, because he himself did not know the correct answer. The existence of the Black Mist is one of his most important secrets, second only to the fact that he is not from this world, but from another world. However, since the Black Mist can be seen by Irian one day, there is no point in continuing to hide it. Sooner or later, more people will know it in the future. This may be a special effect brought about by all attributes reaching extraordinary. However, if Viserys deliberately restrains himself, others seem to be unable to see it. Viserys carefully observed the expression on Irian's face at that time. After Viserys came to his senses, she could no longer see the black fog lingering around him. What is this black fog? Maybe one day exploring the ruins of Illyria will give me an answer. Viserys said silently in his heart. He had this idea a long time ago. Many clues can prove that there must be a deep connection between the black fog lingering around him and the ruins of Illyria. And since he got the map left by Gillian Lannister, and he wanted to solve the mystery on his body, Viserys was almost certain that he would have to go to the ruins of Illyria in person one day in the future. It's just that what his identity was at that time, whether he would lead thousands of warships and tens of thousands of troops to conquer the ruins of Illyria, or fly into the Sea of Smoke alone on a dragon, this is unknown. But one thing is certain. You must be ready. Although Gillian was able to escape from the ruins of Illyria, this does not mean anything. Because everyone who traveled with him had died, it seemed that he was the only lucky person, but in the end he also died at the hands of Viserys. Viserys didn't want to gamble on luck, and he never gambled his chance on fate, because that was a very dangerous move. The horror of the Valyrian ruins is like a big mouth that is always open, and every resident living on the coast or sailor passing through there knows it very well. There is a vast sea of smoke, shrouded in fog all day long. Once a ship mistakenly enters the grey fog of the sea of smoke, it rarely reappears. The sea of smoke is a forbidden place for sailors. Most of the adventurers who went to explore the ruins of Valyria did not even touch that mysterious and ancient land, and were buried in the sea. And even those who were lucky enough to reach that land and return successfully seemed to be entangled in some kind of death curse, and then died one after another. Even the Black Death in his heyday was attacked by an unknown existence in the ruins of Valyria, was seriously injured, and finally escaped from the land over there. Since Viserys was going, he would definitely take Billy Wien with him. Because Gillian's diary stated that there were sea monsters hidden in the sea, riding a dragon through the sky was a special convenience. However, Viserys still had to be wary of the existence that could injure the dragon. Chapter 295, The Savage Disaster. In the afternoon, the sun shines through transparent gauze. Yes, your majesty. Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, has been captured by Stannis. Ramsay Snow got a chair and sat next to Viserys. There were only two people in the empty study. Viserys sat behind the desk, holding a piece of the latest intelligence from across the narrow sea. This was the intelligence that had just been sent back from there. Although there had been a long interval, it was no longer considered news here. But there was no way. After receiving the intelligence, Ramsay hurried over. At the same time, he also had a handwritten letter from his father, Rose Bolton, the Earl of the Dreadfort. However, this letter was not written to his illegitimate son Ramsay Snow, but to Viserys. Although Ramsay was his illegitimate son, Rose Bolton only regarded him as a tool, not his own son. Sending him to Viserys was actually a double-edged act. But Rose Bolton did not expect that Ramsay would be given some important positions by Viserys. So Ramsay, a tool man, grew into a more important tool man. At least in Rose Bolton's opinion. The usurper burned the other alive. Ramsay continued to explain. This incident still caused an uproar in the north. But in the area south of the Marsh Neck, there was no ripple. For the people in the south, the king beyond the wall was completely unknown. Even the wildlings were just legendary creatures. Giants? Cannibals? How could these things really exist? However, due to the lack of information, most of the farmers in the south did not know that a large number of wildlings with agile legs and feet had fled to the area south of the Marsh Neck. They broke up into small groups and hid in the mountains and dense forests during the day to avoid the pursuit of the noble army, and came out at night to attack and plunder the surrounding villages and towns. There have been many cases of wildlings slaughtering villages near the Twins and Sealand. It is said that when Old Free of the Twins heard about this, he was furious. However, he did not dare to scold King Robert. He could only scold the Northerners for being good for nothings, and for letting the wildlings escape from the Marsh Neck, causing his property to be damaged. Then Old Free sent his sons to lead the soldiers of the Free family to capture these wildlings everywhere and bring them to justice. However, these wildlings were very cunning and extremely sensitive to danger. They caused some damage here today and ran to the other side to cause some damage tomorrow. They fired a shot in the east and a cannon in the west. This made Old Free's eldest son, Stevran Free, very depressed. Although the family soldiers neglected training and had low combat effectiveness, they also had a lot of cavalry under their command. However, they were always led by the nose by these wildlings, especially these wildlings liked to go into the mountains. Every time Stevran and his son led the soldiers of the Free family to catch up with these hateful wildlings, they went into the dense forests of the mountains. The infantry had already fallen behind, and the cavalry could not enter the mountains, so they could only dismount and walk in. However, as soon as Stevran and Lyman Free, father and son, led the soldiers to dismount and chase in, they were ambushed by the wildlings. A large stone and a rain of arrows fell, and many soldiers were killed and wounded, and they fled in a hurry. But this is not because the wildlings are so strong, but because the sons of the Free family are too useless. In Seaside City, there is a clear response. A group of wildlings' main forces suddenly attacked Seaside City, seemingly wanting to seize the castle and the town, capture the ships here, and then flee overseas by ship. This is the strategy set by Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, for the wildlings. Don't try to fight the king's army. Don't try to resist. Just run away. Just run away, and run desperately to the warm place in the south. If you can capture a port and rob a few ships, it would be even better, and take the ship to escape to the continent of Essos. There is nothing wrong with Mance Rayder's plan. Even though he was burned to death, more wildlings survived. He didn't care about the life and death of the people behind the wall. Everyone was for themselves. They were almost dying, so who cared whether others could survive? So this group of wildlings broke up into small pieces and fled desperately to the south. They didn't fight with the nobles and the king's army and ran to the mountains and forests when they met them. However, the wildling tribes that attacked Seafront City seemed to have got the wrong direction. Even if they captured Seafront City and had ships, they could only go to the Iron Islands from here. And if they wanted to go to the more prosperous and vast Essos continent, they had to bypass the Summer Sea to reach the Essos continent. However, there was the Molester family in Seafront City, and Earl Jason was not as useless as the Little Freeze. This brave Earl once led the army to stubbornly resist the attack of the Ironman, beheaded the son of King Balin in battle, and drove them all into the sea. Now this group of wildlings really kicked on the Iron Plate if they wanted to attack Seafront City. Then Jason Molester led the soldiers of Sea City out of the city, defeated the attack of the wildlings, cut off thousands of heads, and drove the wildlings into the deep mountains of Waste Stone City. The defeated wildlings fled towards the west. On the other side, the strongest fortress in the valley, the Moon Mountains, is home to a large number of mountain clans. There seemed to be traces of wildlings here. However, these wildling tribes did not conflict with the mountain clans. Both of them were tribal clans that did not obey the king and the Duke of the Eagle's Nest and mainly lived on looting. They hid in the mountains, and the knights of the valley could not enter the mountains to wipe them out. Instead, they often encountered ambushes. The mountain clans have always been a major concern for the valley. Now the wildling tribes and the mountain clans seem to have joined hands, and they are crazy active in the Green Fork River, the King's Road, and even the towns and villages in the valley, looting caravans and travelers. The entire trade route town along the Moon Mountains was disturbed, and the smoke of war was everywhere. The destruction caused by hundreds of thousands of wildlings pouring into the Seven Kingdoms continued, and it spread rapidly to various regions like the spread of an epidemic. Now the traces of wildlings have appeared in the north, the Riverlands, the Westerly, and the Vale. However, this kind of influence is still advancing to the south. Perhaps in the near future, we will see these wildlings near King's Landing and the Reach. John Arryn, the Prime Minister who stayed in King's Landing, was worried about these things. And Viserys, who was thousands of miles away, was watching the intelligence with relish. In fact, the destruction of the wildlings was just a minor disease, not enough to subvert the rule of the Iron Throne. Because except for the Battle of Sealand, this group of wildlings did not systematically attack castles, but only harassed villages and towns. If they want to attack King's Landing, they will really seek death. However, it is this kind of itchy little problem that makes people very annoying. It was impossible for John Arryn to launch another conscription in the name of the king, leading the army to run around the world and wipe out these annoying wildlings one by one. The nobles in various places could only clean up their own mess, instead of just driving them away. Although the Battle of Seamarsh was a great victory, the wildlings driven to the Westerlands caused a lot of damage in the local area, which attracted protests from Casterly Rock. Solve your own family's affairs by yourself. Don't expect the king to clean up your ass. What John Arryn fears most now is that these nobles use the wildlings as a means of political struggle. Don't kill those who can be killed. Just drive them to the territory of competitors and give them a headache. Time passed quickly. In a blink of an eye, Robert led his troops to the north, and it has been almost a year since he left King's Landing. However, at this time, another thing happened that made the already busy John Arryn even more anxious. That is, a rumor suddenly spread in the streets of King's Landing. Queen Cersei is pregnant. Chapter 296 Storm. King Robert has been away from King's Landing for almost a year, and the queen is suddenly pregnant. John Arryn, who heard the news, felt that his nose was crooked. His first reaction was that this was a rumor. Anyone could understand what this meant. But if it really happened, I'm afraid Jonarin would not be able to stop Robert from killing Cersei, the slut, and her adulterer. The Lannister family might be dissatisfied with this, but Jonarin analyzed that there should be no civil war. Because Tywin Lannister can sacrifice anyone except his beloved son Jaime. Now Jonarin doesn't know who the adulterer is, he can only hope that this is really a rumor. Then he quickly found Queen Cersei's younger brother Jaime Lannister and asked him to find out the reason for this with him. But this is just an excuse, and the real intention is equivalent to house arrest. Although Jonarin believes that, if this is true, the queen really has an affair with someone else and cuckolds the king, Tywin will sacrifice his daughter without mercy. But he doesn't dare to gamble. After all, he is not a worm in Tywin's stomach. Who knows what Tywin is thinking? He dare not risk a civil war. And now Tywin's beloved son Jaime is in their hands. Jonarin must first control Jaime to prevent him from finding an opportunity to sneak out of King's Landing and escape back to the west. In that case, the Iron Throne will have no control over Casterly Rock. If the Lannister family takes advantage of the king's army to the north to rebel, it will be troublesome. Therefore, the actions of the old Prime Minister Jonarin are sharp, tough, and vigorous. Although he is old, he is not too old to walk. At the same time, it is precisely for this reason that King's Landing was in turmoil and people were panicked. Then Jonarin sat on the Iron Throne to perform the duties of the king, commanding the Gold Cloaks to enter the Red Castle and control all the guards and servants in the Red Castle. He had reason to suspect that the queen's adultery was among these people, and anyone would become a witness to this matter. However, the other guards of the Red Keep laid down their weapons, while the captain of the King's Guard, Ser Barristan the Fearless, led the other White Knights to refuse to surrender and hand over Jaime. He claimed that, if they wanted to take the queen away, they had to step over his body first. The two sides were deadlocked outside Meagher's holdfast, and the situation was tense for a while. After intensive coordination and negotiation between the Prime Minister and the Queen, a compromise was finally reached. Jaime Lannister, a member of the King's Guard, was temporarily placed under house arrest, while Queen Cersei was in Meagher's holdfast, being examined by Grand Maester Pycelle. During the examination, Barristan Selmy would accompany and monitor the whole process to ensure that the dignity of Her Majesty the Queen would not be violated. Afterwards, the Grand Maester, who was staggering when walking, finally came to Meagher's holdfast. He bowed slightly to Queen Cersei and apologized. "Your Majesty, the examination may touch your body. Please forgive me." Pycelle's voice trembled. However, in a place that Jonarin and the captain of the King's Guard could not see, the two exchanged glances, indicating that they had already been connected. Seeing the look from Grand Maester Pycelle, the elegant woman with long golden hair restrained some of the pretended anger on her face, snorted, and reluctantly nodded in agreement. Then, "Forgive me." The Grand Maester's hand trembled as he reached into the Queen's dress and gently rubbed it for a long time. Feeling an old hand touching her body, Cersei did not say a word, but a trace of disgust was clearly wiped across her eyes. Then the Grand Maester took his hand back. "Lord Jonarin, Her Majesty is not pregnant," the old Grand Maester Pycelle said with certainty. "If you don't believe my judgment, you can ask other Maesters to confirm it." Standing aside and hearing Grand Maester Pycelle's words, Jonarin, as the hand of the king, breathed a sigh of relief. "No, I believe in your judgment, Grand Maester." In fact, he didn't want Cersei to be pregnant more than anyone else. When this rumor first started, Jonarin didn't take it seriously. It wasn't until it became so popular that even the nobles began to discuss it in whispers that Jonarin had to respond, and this was the last resort. But he also knew that he had offended the queen, and he felt deeply guilty. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty." The old Prime Minister just opened his mouth to apologize to the queen. However, the queen with long golden hair was angry at first, but at this time she became much calmer, and the anger on her face also dissipated a lot. "It's not your fault, Lord Jonarin." Cersei took the initiative to forgive the old Prime Minister, which did surprise Jonarin a little. Although the woman's eyes were still flashing with cruelty, she didn't seem to be very willing. "The seven gods will testify. Since the result can prove my innocence, it's enough." Cersei wanted to take this opportunity to actively create an innocent image and protect her children. But the criminal who fabricated this rumor is insulting the honor of the royal family. His heart is worthy of death and his crime is unforgivable. He must be caught as soon as possible and severely judged. These people must be the remnants of Targaryen, trying to disturb the peace of King's Landing in this troubled time. Then Cersei gritted her teeth slightly and put the blame on Viserys. However, if Viserys heard her words here, he might feel that he was wronged. This rumor actually has nothing to do with him. How could he know that Cersei was pregnant when he was far away in Pentos? But Cersei knew it well. After Robert left the Red Castle in King's Landing, no one could control her. Cersei did not take protective measures during an indulgence and really got pregnant accidentally. However, Cersei still had a little fluke mentality. She did not want to abort the child and wanted to give birth to it secretly. But this matter was exposed by the personal maid, saying that the queen had not had her period for a long time, which caused this huge storm. However, now that daring maid has sunk into the well, Cersei's child had already disappeared under the moon tea carefully prepared by Grand Maester Pycelle. Although the queen's pregnancy crisis in King's Landing finally came to an end, the sharp-eyed prime minister still noticed something unusual. Some of the maids and guards in the Red Keep were taken away for secret questioning. Chapter 297, Year 292 of the Aegon calendar. Westeros has experienced many ups and downs. Soon, the year 292 of the Aegon calendar arrived. The largest army in the history of Westeros, a human coalition of 60,000 people, arrived at Winterfell. After the arrival of the army, it first suppressed some of the wildlings who were raging in the north. These wildling tribes, which used to be rampant, suffered a devastating blow when faced with the strong soldiers of the southern nobles. The iron hooves of the coalition galloped on the land of the north, and the knights wielded their swords to chop off the heads of the wildlings and bolter Jingwen. The wildling tribes who thought that everything would be fine if they escaped into the deep mountains and old forests in the past realized that they had made a big mistake this time. The southern nobles are much richer than the nobles in the north, and it can also be shown in the equipment of the soldiers. The soldiers of the southern nobles are almost armed to the teeth with full armor and covered with steel. These well-equipped elite soldiers chased into the dense forest with shields and longswords. The ambush of the wildlings did not even have any effect on these elite soldiers. The weak arrows could not penetrate the hard shields and armor, but the sharp swords could easily split their chests. There were even arrows stained with kerosene, which shot into the dense forest and illuminated their tracks. Countless soldiers of the coalition army dipped the arrowheads in kerosene and then ignited them on torches. There was a unified command from the officers. Shoot, shoot, bang, bang, bang. Arrows burning with fire flew into the air and then poured down in an instant like a spectacular rain of fire. Countless wild men hiding in the woods preparing for an ambush were illuminated by the fire. Puff, puff, puff. Dense rockets fell down, and the burning arrowheads pierced into the flesh and blood, causing terrible pain, and when they fell on the leaves and branches, a huge fire burned. The end of the wild men has come. Because the wild men's rebellion has gradually escalated, Robert has also made up his mind to spend a lot of effort to deal with them. Of course, it is not impossible to suppress the bandits. Master Huang has the ability to suppress the bandits. But what needs to be considered is how much it will cost to suppress the bandits. What is the ratio of this cost to the loss? Whether it is worth considering. The loss of military pay and food is astronomical. In fact, many nobles are not incapable of suppressing the bandits, but considering the losses, it is not worth doing so. And seeing that the wildlings disturbing the Seven Kingdoms have gradually approached the King's Landing River Bay, Robert is also a little anxious. Robert once thought that sending troops to guard the causeway would be foolproof. But he made a mistake, that is, treating the wildling tribe as a regular army. The wildling tribe is not a regular army, and it can even be said that they are a group of rabble, which is different from the enemies Robert has faced before. Blocking the causeway is a way to deal with the regular army. In fact, there are many densely packed paths in the neck of the marsh. The marshland people are very familiar with the terrain here and usually travel through it. Pedestrians can pass through, but the army cannot abandon the heavy baggage wagons and pass through the narrow paths in the swamps and the waterways and the reeds. Therefore, the causeway is the only way to ensure the safety of the army. The wild tribes who have lived in the extremely harsh environment outside the Great Wall for many years are different from the pampered Southern Army. They are just small teams based on tribes, and crossing mountains and swamps has long been a common thing for the wild people. For these routes, that only the people in the swamps are familiar with, the wild people also suffered, and paid a great price, to pass through the narrow paths in the swamps and the waterways and the reeds. When Robert saw this group of wild people spreading like a plague, he had to be ruthless, and spend a lot of effort to suppress the bandits, even at the cost of setting fire to the mountains. However, the effect of Robert's ruthlessness was immediate. Within a month, all the wild people who had been raging in the entire northern border disappeared collectively. Countless heads rolled down. Of course, Robert did not kill all these roaming wildlings, but killed a group of them, and the remaining group became much more low-key, and continued to hide, no longer as rampant as before. After Robert led the 60,000 human coalition forces to spend a lot of effort to suppress the bandits, the next thing was to deal with the possible attacks of the White Walkers. However, although the Horn of Winter did not completely collapse the Wall of Despair, it only collapsed a small section, but there was a gap in the Wall of Despair, and it was impossible to repair it quickly now. The construction of the Wall of Despair was extremely magnificent, and it was almost impossible for humans to complete the project. Robert now had no ability to call on the whole country to rebuild the wall, and could only continue to patch it up on this basis, hoping that it would have some effect. The cold wind of winter was biting. The fat man with a black beard held a heavy storm hammer, which was a heavy two-handed hammer and Robert's favorite weapon. He looked at the ghost forest shrouded in the morning mist in the distance, and did not speak for a long time. Robert, who loved drinking on weekdays, rarely quit drinking in recent days, perhaps feeling that his inner anxiety was getting more and more restless. He didn't know what a White Walker was, and whether he could kill him with a hammer. However, he knew that this battle was his most difficult one, perhaps even more critical than the War of the Usurper. Although he now owned the 7 kingdoms, his territory was much larger than the Targaryen remnants who had fled overseas, and he had more soldiers and generals. However, the internal entanglements of the 7 kingdoms were too deep, so that they were entangled with each other, and it was difficult for them to unite and exert their strength. I don't know why. Robert suddenly wanted to meet the young man named Viserys Targaryen. Edition. We will defeat that shitty White Walker, right? Robert suddenly cursed for no reason, and then turned his head to look at his good brother standing beside him. And Eddard Stark obviously knew Robert's temper a long time ago. The other party was a jerk who spoke without restraint. If he was not the heir of Storm's End, and his fiancée had not been taken away by Rhaegar, perhaps he should be a mercenary traveling around the world, living in fine wine and prostitutes every day. The man with long dark brown hair frowned slightly, and then slowly relaxed. The same is true for him. Eddard had an older brother, Brandon Stark, who was later burned alive by the Mad King. Therefore, Eddard was not trained as the heir of Winterfell, so he was sent to the Vale to be Jon Arryn's adopted son. Yes. Eddard Stark took a deep breath and said, just like in the past, in the distant north, the human coalition is actively preparing fortifications. And in Pentus, Rumble, another army of more than 10,000 people rushed to the city of Pentus on the eve of the new year. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298 The Golden Group's Allegiance. In the year 292 of the Egan calendar, a grand ceremony of New Year celebration. Your Majesty, your command is the direction indicated by the banner of the Golden Company. In the palace on the top of the 9 towers, Mies Toyne, the current leader of the Golden Company, knelt down in the center of the hall and expressed his submission to King Viserys. The banner of the Golden Company is made of the skulls of the previous leaders, which were boiled and plated with gold. These golden skulls are hung under the banner. Whenever the Golden Company fights, they must be in front of the battle, in the direction indicated by the golden banner. All the warriors of the Golden Company will bravely take the lead. In fact, half a year ago, before the Dothraki attacked Pentus, the Golden Company had already contacted Jon Connington and Viserys through Illyrio's relationship. The Golden Company wanted to join the Targaryen family, just like the Windblown Company, and transformed from a mercenary army to a regular army of the Targaryen family. The Golden Company has more than 10,000 soldiers, and naturally they have conditions for joining the Targaryen family. They asked Illyrio and John Connington to lobby for this condition. Many commanders of the Golden Company are actually descendants of survivors of the Blackfire Rebellion during the Targaryen dynasty. Many of them are even distant relatives of Viserys, because Blackfire itself is a branch of the Targaryen family, which is a hidden danger left by Aegon IV's legalization of illegitimate children. However, they do have Targaryen blood flowing in their bodies, but it is already extremely thin. And the rest are the descendants of nobles and knights who once stood on the side of Demon Blackfire. Their fiefs, titles and properties in the country had long been confiscated, so they were forced to drift to the continent of Essos, and they have been unable to return to their homes for generations. The conditions that the Golden Company initially demanded from Viserys were that the Golden Company swear allegiance to the Targaryen family and help Viserys return to Westeros to regain the Iron Throne, and Viserys promised to restore the territories and titles of these nobles. However, this condition was flatly rejected by Viserys. Although the loyalty of the 10,000 warriors of the Golden Company is very tempting, Viserys is not short of soldiers and generals now, and does not rely solely on the people of the Golden Company. Now under the new political system, everyone is starting over, and has the opportunity to become a noble and climb to a high position. Promising high positions to the commanders of the Golden Company easily will cool the hearts of the soldiers who have always followed Viserys in the battle. And it will also provide obstacles for those nobles who want to surrender in the future attack on Westeros. After Viserys rejected this condition of the Golden Company, some time passed. The war of 80,000 Dothraki besieging Pentos failed, and the arrogant Dothraki rode on their war horses and fled in a hurry like a dog that had lost its home. After these fleeing Dothrakis escaped from the range of Pentos, they turned their horses around and suddenly launched an attack to massacre me. The Golden Company, which had signed a contract with me, saw that things were not going well, and took the initiative to break the contract for the first time, and fled to Volantis. The Golden Company's escape before the battle also indirectly led to Miz's lack of resistance, and being massacred by the Dothraki. Not long after this incident, the envoys of the Golden Company came to Pentos again. This time they no longer mentioned the previous conditions, but lowered their attitude. This time the Golden Company only asked Viserys to issue a written decree to pardon the crimes of the descendants of the family who had participated in the Blackfire Rebellion. Let them participate in the promotion system in a fair manner and rely on military merits to regain their ancestral titles and fiefs. Viserys agreed to this new condition offered by the Golden Company without hesitation for too long. If the people of the Golden Company are all descendants of the former rebels, and the Targaryen family lost the Iron Throne, the Westeros nobles who now swear allegiance to the usurper are all rebels. If Viserys could forgive them, why couldn't he accept the Golden Group? Moreover, the Blackfire Rebellion that had happened before actually had nothing to do with him. Because he was not a real Targaryen, no one knew about this except himself. And the country he wanted to establish was not a continuation of the Targaryen dynasty. It was similar to the connection between the Western Han dynasty and the Eastern Han dynasty, with little connection except the name. In the future history, it was not that the great Targaryen dynasty experienced 10 years of rebellion and turmoil. The Iron Throne was briefly stolen by the usurper, and then the Great Majesty Viserys III re-established his army on the other side of the Narrow Sea to retake the Iron Throne. Viserys has now established a completely different system in Andalus and Pentos. He is not the real Viserys, nor is he from this world. This is his biggest secret. He was once fortunate to receive a good education, and grew up in a peaceful and comfortable environment, without war, hunger, or poverty. Therefore, when Viserys, as an adult, just came into this world, he seemed at a loss and trembling. Even killing a person, which seems to be a common thing in this world, requires courage. Viserys knows what the more advanced political system of the future will be, where the people are the masters, but he cannot copy it, because it is too advanced. Copying it mechanically will only cause greater trouble. Therefore, Viserys has been thinking about it for a long time. He has been thinking about this problem since Andalus was just established. In the end, it took several years, after learning and understanding, to patch up the original political aristocratic system in this world, and put on some patches that are useful to him. For example, the power of the feudal nobles was collected, the centralization of power was strengthened, the separation of military and political affairs, and the system of military merit promotion was strengthened. Because of these policies, the army of the Targaryen family has maintained a super high combat effectiveness. These are not just obtained by training. It is for these reasons that Viserys can say that the country he wants to establish is not a continuation of the Targaryen dynasty, and Oberyn thinks that Viserys is a very special person. History is a wheel rolling forward, starting from one point and then turning a circle and returning to the starting point over and over again. Oberyn believed that Viserys would break this repetitive wheel and start a transformation. Viserys agreed to the conditions of the Golden Company and accepted the descendants of these once guilty nobles and knights. He personally wrote an edict in the name of King Viserys III to pardon the crimes on their heads in written form. In fact, Viserys could understand the descendants of these criminals. Having an edict made the commanders of the Golden Company feel at ease, so that they would not worry that Viserys would suddenly turn against them one day. Chapter 299 Biting a Crow to Death. They received a pardon written by Viserys himself and stamped with the dragon head emblem of the Targaryen family. When the messenger brought this edict back to Volantis, it immediately set off an uproar within the Golden Group. Some people thought that they lived well here and did not want to return to Westeros, while more commanders of the Golden Group could not help crying with joy, because returning to their hometown has always been a wish passed down from generation to generation from their fathers. However, many people's wishes have become last wishes that have not yet been fulfilled and can only be passed on to their descendants again. And now this wish has finally come true. They want to fight back to Westeros as a pioneer. At the same time, Viserys pardoned their guilt, which means that they can return to their hometown after regaining the Iron Throne in the future, and they can also obtain titles through merit. Although they were pardoned for their guilt, Robert could also give them these. But the Golden Group still prefers the Targaryen family. After all, the Blackfyre Rebellion is still the Targaryen family's own family affair anyway. What is a usurper? Robert sat on the Iron Throne relying only on the meager bloodline of his grandmother, Lyanna Targaryen. With the most legitimate Targaryen heir and a better choice in front of him, the Golden Company naturally looked down on Robert. Red or black, a dragon is a dragon. Some contracts are written in ink, while others are written in blood. The Golden Company, with tens of thousands of soldiers, joined the Targaryen family and became the 4th Legion of the kingdom. The 1st Legion was composed of Andal warriors who followed Viserys at first. The 2nd Legion was mainly composed of the Rhoynar who were conquered later. And the 3rd Legion was composed of 20,000 Dothraki who were directly under Viserys' orders and were now commanded by Cargo. The 4th Legion was the Golden Company, composed of the nobles and soldiers of the 7 kingdoms who were exiled and wandered in the continent of Essos, and was still led by the Blackheart Mistoyne. Although he was called Blackheart, and his appearance was also very ugly, unlike his distant ancestor Terence Toyne, who was dark-skinned and handsome, he had a crooked chin and pot-shaped ears. However, Mistoyne was not cruel. He was a fair and firm knight in his bones, otherwise he would not have become friends with Jon Connington. His nickname was just because his family emblem looked like a black heart. At this time, a grand ceremony was being held in the city of Pentos to celebrate the new year and welcome the arrival of the Golden Group. Viserys sat on the throne at the highest point of the hall with the crown on his head, accepting the allegiance of Mistoyne and many commanders of the Golden Group. Harry Strickland, Ben Berrine, Dick Cole, Gory Zedoin, etc. The hall was full of noise, with a large number of commanders of the Golden Group sitting, as well as Jon Connington, Bessie Joyce, the Tattered Prince, and the Sand Snake Sisters. Irian sat next to Viserys. Rhaenys and Daenerys did not attend the dinner. They went to Pentos to play. It was a grand dinner. All the guests present raised their glasses together, wishing Viserys to regain the Iron Throne as soon as possible, and wishing him a long rule. During the dinner, the 3rd sister of the Sand Snakes, the sweet-looking Tyene with long golden hair, was still secretly seducing Viserys. Hey! A pair of watery light blue eyes locked on the handsome profile of the silver-haired young man. Your Majesty. Am I beautiful? Then the girl quietly held Viserys' hand under the table. It was no secret in the palace that the sand snakes wanted to climb into Viserys' bed and become his lover. But Arianne seemed to care nothing about it. She never expected Viserys to have only her as a woman. The nature of Dornishmen is a matter of common knowledge, and keeping mistresses is a normal operation. Illegitimate children and mistresses are not even a matter of damaging the honor of the nobility in Dorne. Oberyn himself played even more fancy, because Oberyn was a guy who liked both men and women. He believed that God created both sexes, and if you only favor one side, you will lose the fun of the other half. After the dinner, Viserys also drank a lot of wine, but because of his special physique, he was basically sober. My love, slow down. In the corridor, Arianne helped Viserys back to his room, holding a lamp in her hand, and then pushed open the door. In his room, there was already an uninvited guest at this moment. Of course, it was not the Sand Snake sisters who appeared in Viserys' bedroom. It was the big black cat, with a dead crow in his mouth, which seemed to have climbed in from the balcony. The dead crow was placed on the windowsill, and the black cat squatted beside it. He didn't rush to taste the delicious food, but licked his paws and wiped it on his face. Bite a crow to death. Viserys, who had just drunk a lot of wine, was stunned when he saw such a scene as soon as he entered the door. Since the last time Viserys infused the black mist into the black cat's body, Balerion has not shown any special changes. Viserys observed carefully for a few days at first, but then gave up. However, so much time has passed, and Viserys has not paid much attention to the black cat. Only then did he realize that the cat seemed to have become a little thinner, and his eyes became more lively. Balerion used to have difficulty climbing trees because of his size, not to mention climbing a tree to catch a bird, but now he has killed a big black crow. Balerion's progress impressed Viserys. More importantly, he had some preliminary guesses about the effect of the black mist on Balerion. Chapter 300 Experiment. The next morning, several guards in the palace were scratched in the face for trying to catch the cat. They didn't know why His Majesty suddenly had the urge to ask them to find Balerion. At first, several guards thought His Majesty wanted them to go out of the city to find the black dragon, and they were a little timid about it. After all, the dragon obeyed the orders of the true king and would not pay attention to the words of these soldiers. When Balerion burned the Dothraki, they also witnessed the miserable state of the enemy on the top of the city, and they were afraid that they would be roasted by the dragon's flames if they rushed over and couldn't explain clearly. If they died in that way, no one would avenge them. Then Viserys saw that they had misunderstood and explained that he didn't ask them to find the black dragon, but to catch the black cat that was domineering in the palace. The black cat and the black dragon have the same name. After hearing His Majesty's explanation, several guards breathed a sigh of relief. Understood, Your Majesty. They didn't have the courage to go to the dragon, but it was no problem to catch a cat. Then several guards set off confidently. Come here. Viserys thought for a moment and asked someone to arrange for 10 chickens to be caught in the back kitchen. Because he was going to do an experiment today, the 10 chickens were quickly caught and locked in an unused hut. However, the cat that Viserys asked to be caught did not arrive. When Viserys was a little confused, several guards came late with the cat tied up. Several guards looked a little miserable, with blood marks on their faces and arms scratched by ruthless iron claws. Viserys was slightly stunned. Seeing their appearance, he almost imagined the fierce scene of the cat-catching battle. Were you beaten by a cat? Viserys looked at the miserable appearance of these guards and couldn't help asking. He remembered that Balerion had a good temper with people. He was round and plump, and he would lie on the ground to bask in the sun when he had nothing to do. When several guards heard the words of His Majesty the King, they looked at each other and couldn't help but lower their heads in shame. They had not expected that this big fat cat would be so powerful now. The cat jumped up and down during the whole process of catching the cat, and even after catching it, it was scratched on the face by a cat punch. In the end, they had no choice but to tie Balerion up with a rope and send him to Viserys. Meow. The black cat, which was tied up like a dumpling, still made a protest cry at this time. It grumbled a few times, but could not move. Viserys looked at the miserable appearance of the black cat and couldn't help but smile, trying not to laugh out loud. Okay, you've worked hard. You guys go down. Let the doctor prescribe some medicine for you. Then Viserys waved his hand to send away these useless guards and then untied the big black cat. Balerion just wanted to escape after being untied. Still want to run? But although it was very majestic just now, it couldn't make any waves in Viserys' palm. Destiny was directly pinched by the back of the neck skillfully and then lifted up. Did you see these chickens? Viserys pointed at the 10 restless chickens in the house while holding Balerion. In just a short while, several chicken droppings were left on the ground. Go. Bite them to death. Viserys gave Balerion an order directly. He wanted to see if the black cat's fighting power had changed. However, Balerion didn't know whether he understood Viserys' words or not. There seemed to be some doubts on his little face. But he seemed to understand what he meant, and he whimpered. But he didn't understand why Viserys ordered him to bite these chickens to death. Then the big black cat was put down, but it wasn't the cat's turn to attack these chickens. These chickens came to Balerion to make trouble. They were suddenly taken away from their living place, and another unknown creature appeared in the tribe. The roosters immediately came over aggressively, trying to bite the big black cat with their mouths. Balerion didn't want to provoke these chickens, but he didn't expect these chickens to take the initiative to make trouble for him. He was furious. Meow. The big black cat let out a sharp and shrill whimper, and then nimbly dodged the attack of the rooster. It pounced on it fiercely like a tiger descending from the mountain, and opened its sharp teeth to bite a chicken's throat directly. Blood gushed out instantly, dyeing the hair on Balerion's chin red. Viserys had a smile on his face just now. But when he saw Balerion's counterattack, after being provoked by the roosters, the smile on his face suddenly withdrew a little. So powerful. Normally, it seems difficult for a cat to beat an adult rooster. But now Balerion's performance is really. Viserys narrowed his eyes and watched the chickens and cats flying and jumping in the house, with chicken feathers flying all over the sky. Balerion showed a super strong fighting power, which was definitely far better than his previous strength. No wonder Wooly and his friends had such a hard time catching a cat just now, and their faces were covered with blood. It seems that he had wronged them. Balerion's speed, reaction, and strength are completely different from before. Could it be the effect of the black mist? Viserys thought silently. At this moment, 3 of the 10 roosters have been bitten to death by Balerion, and the rest have all been scared away. It should be. If it weren't for the effect of the black mist, Viserys couldn't explain the drastic changes in the cat in a short period of time. Giving the black mist can enhance the ability of an individual, but I don't know if there is an upper limit to this enhancement. Viserys couldn't see whether Balerion absorbed the black mist after killing those chickens, which was also what he was concerned about. However, it shouldn't be possible. Because Viserys had done experiments before, he killed many different kinds of animals and none of them had the black mist. Only humans with intelligence have the black mist, so Viserys guessed that the black mist should be the soul. And Viserys himself is now the source of the black mist. Balerion's black mist was given by him, and the black cat itself does not have the ability to absorb the black mist. This is equivalent to Viserys being the source of all the black mist, and the other people or animals who were given the black mist by him were just a seed, and their strength was enhanced. Can they help me collect the black mist? A bold idea flashed through Viserys' mind. Viserys had personally executed many death row prisoners, but he received reasonable advice that a king should not become an executioner. And if Viserys could now let others help him collect the black mist by giving the black mist, wouldn't it be more convenient? Viserys flashed this idea through his mind. However, the only thing he had tested now was the black cat, and he couldn't let the black cat attack and kill a human. This matter still needed him to confirm in the future. It seems that I should find a trustworthy person to test. Viserys took a deep breath and said silently in his heart. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.